Chapter 1544. Zhang Yan cultivated in seclusion on the Scarlet Continent. In the blink of an eye, 10 years passed. In these 10 years, he refined external medicines that were enough for an ordinary mortal metamorphosis cultivator to consume for 100 years, but the harvest was also great. His magic power rose layer by layer, and he took a big step forward. According to his original estimation, with his cultivation speed, under normal circumstances, it would take him about 1,000 years to reach the third gate. But now, it seemed that he wouldn't need that long. Calculating the time in his heart, it was almost time for the spirit cave to close and reopen, so he stopped cultivating. With a thought, he returned to the Yin God's spirit cave. Looking around, he saw that he had returned to the place he left, and he couldn't help but nod. He originally wanted to open a small world in the Yuhuan heavens so that it would be convenient for him to cultivate, but since he could return to the Scarlet Continent, he gave up on this idea. Mortal metamorphosis cultivators opening their own small world wasn't bad, but if there was an enemy with a similar cultivation level, they only needed to catch a trace of their aura, and with a little calculation, they would be able to know where they were. Even if they didn't barge in, they could still attack the person hiding in the small world. In this aspect, Qi Lu was far superior. Only he could travel to this place, and with the methods that the owner of the demonic treasury had shown so far, even a true Yang cultivator wouldn't be able to find this place. Although he had disappeared for 10 years, the great devils with some intelligence in the spirit cave still maintained a certain level of vigilance. At this moment, when his aura appeared, they all retreated far away. Only some of the less intelligent great devils rushed over impatiently and were naturally refined by him without hesitation. Now that the gate was about to open, he didn't plan to search for demons, and just waited in place. After waiting for a few days, he suddenly felt a change in the Severing Sky World cave, as if he had crossed a distance of tens of thousands of miles in an instant. The fog in front of him slowly dispersed, and when he looked up, he was already back in front of the gate. Almost at the same time, the bronze gate in front of him rumbled open, and a deep voice came from outside. "Fellow Zhang, are you still there?" Zhang Yan smiled, took a step forward, and immediately turned into a ray of light. In an instant, he appeared outside the gate, and he bowed. "Fellow Guan, greetings." Guan Longzhao, on the other hand, retreated a little without anyone noticing. He looked at Qin Lai with eyes full of wariness as he said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist just came out of the spirit cave. I, Guan Longzhao, am guarding this place, so I need to inspect you with a magic tool to see if you are possessed by a demonic being." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "That's reasonable." Guan Longzhao took out a spell and the talismans on both sides of the cliff swayed. Immediately, rays of golden light shone down. Not only did the devil have the ability to transform, but it could also attach itself to a cultivator's soul. Thus, it was necessary to observe it with a magical artifact to prevent it from sneaking into the world and causing trouble. After the light landed on Zhang Yan's body, he stared at it closely. If there was anything strange, he would immediately activate the power of the array to suppress it. Guan Longzhao was a little surprised. He knew how powerful the demon in the spirit cave was. At first, he didn't think much of Zhang Yan's trip, and if there was anything strange, he would immediately activate the formation to suppress it. But after a few breaths, the light faded, and Zhang Yan was still calmly standing in the same place. Guan Longzhao was a little surprised. He knew how powerful the demon in the spirit cave was. At first, he didn't think much of Zhang Yan's trip, and he thought that he would most likely fall into the trap. But now, he came out unscathed, and it was a little unbelievable, but at the same time, he was relieved, and he bowed and said apologetically, "Fellow Taoist, just now." Zhang Yan smiled and returned the bow. "Fellow Taoist, it's my duty. How can I offend you? I've been in the spirit cave for 10 years, and I've just finished my task, so I should take my leave now." This was a forbidden area, so Guan Longzhao didn't ask him to stay, and said, "Take care, fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan nodded, and with a thought, he turned into a ray of light and flew out. Guan Longzhao looked at Zhang Shangzhen and sighed in his heart. At this moment, he seemed to have thought of something and thought to himself, "This Zhang Shangzhen must have a divine art or magic treasure that can restrain the devil. If that's the case, maybe I can ask him to do it?" After pondering for a moment, he returned to the cave residence where he usually hid. He picked up a brush and wrote a letter. The letter turned into a streak of golden light and flew out, quickly disappearing into the clouds. When Zhang Yan returned to the skyscraping spirit boat, he sensed that there were many more demon servants, and it was the same as when he left 10 years ago. Renji was in seclusion, and his aura was surging. It was obvious that his cultivation had improved greatly. Chu Pang was patrolling the wasteland inside the boat, and when he sensed Zhang Yan's return, he stepped on the clouds and came out. He said happily, "Master is back." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Did anything happen while I was away?" He was just asking casually, but Chu Pang said, "Master, there was a letter 3 years ago, and another one a year ago. They are both here." As he spoke, he lowered his 2 heads, and 2 wisps of green smoke came out of his horns, and 2 talismans flew out. Zhang Yan waved his hand, and the 2 letters flew into his hand. He opened them, and the one 3 years ago was sent by Tanbua sect's Taoist Tonghai. It said that the Feast of Pearls would be held in a few years, and it was one of the grand events in the Yuhuan heavens. At that time, the Heavenly Lord would also appear, so the letter asked if he was going. He pondered for a while, and in order to obtain the divine item left behind by Great Underworld Patriarch, the most important thing now was to improve his cultivation as soon as possible, and there was no need for him to be distracted by other matters. However, he would be able to get to know a lot of powerful cultivators. Perhaps they would be able to help him suppress the Xianhong Heaven sect in the future, so after thinking about it, he decided to send his avatar. The other letter was from the Mi Zhe sect's Gujuing. He said that he had encountered a lot of danger on the way back, but because he had refined that treasure, he had the power to protect himself and successfully returned to the inner realm. He had also taken back his original sect. Everything was fine, but a year ago, a group of cultivators came, claiming to be from the Bayan sect. They said that the founder of the sect was also a disciple of the Great Underworld Patriarch. They also said that the mountain gate of the Mi River sect was originally their mountain gate, and they wanted the Mi River sect to quickly return it. Not only that, but they also gathered a large number of realm warriors and surrounded the sect. Gujuing wasn't afraid of this person, but he knew that once a conflict arose, the matter would only grow bigger and bigger. At that time, the person behind this person would only interfere. So he simply took out his supreme treasure and sealed the mountain. Because he was afraid that Zhang Yan would come looking for him, he sent a letter to inform him of this matter. Zhang Yan shook his head. This group of people had come so suddenly, and anyone with a discerning eye could see that there was a problem. However, although this method seemed crude, it was very effective, especially since the Mi Zhe sect had only returned after 1,000 years. They no longer had any foundation in the heart-curved heaven sect and could be said to be alone. The people from the Bayan sect might really have some connection to the Great Underworld Patriarch. This wasn't strange. The Ji Jian sect he had been to was like this. In truth, it was just an ancestor of the sect that found the cave left behind by the Great Underworld Patriarch. Although the Mi Zhe sect could rely on the treasure to resist for a while, since the other party had come looking for them, they must have a backup plan. Their previous actions were more like a test to see if Gujuing could invite someone with enough power to come forward. If he couldn't, it would be hard to say what would happen next. He thought about it. Since he already knew about this matter, it wouldn't be good for him to ignore it. However, he wasn't prepared to go personally, and was prepared to leave it to his clone to handle. After putting down the letter, he took out the green cloud talisman and activated it with his transcendence energy. There was a sudden brilliance, and in the blink of an eye, the spell boat and the people were back in front of the golden hall of Imperial Edict. Standing in the boat, he looked around and found that the situation here was very different from the last time he came. Rays of light came and went continuously, but most of them seemed to be in a hurry. He got out of the spell boat and floated towards the hall of Imperial Edict. Just now, when he reached the top of the steps, Taoist Do had already appeared. He cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Greetings, Your Excellency." Zhang Yan nodded and asked, "Fellow Taoist Do, the last time I came here, it was quite deserted. Why are there so many people here this time?" Taoist Do replied, "I'm afraid you haven't heard, Your Excellency. Half a year ago, the heavenly lord of the fifth sense heaven failed to overcome his tribulation and returned to the netherworld. He died, and the heavenly lords of the other worlds found an opportunity to secretly send people to support the sects that they thought highly of. Now, in this world, the various sects are fighting to choose the next heavenly lord, and the sounds of killing can be heard everywhere. "Oh," Zhang Yan said, "could it be that there are cultivators from other worlds who can take the position of heavenly lord?" Taoist Do chuckled and said, "Of course they can. Besides, this matter isn't up to the fellow Taoists of the fifth sense heaven to decide. With the death of the heavenly lord, the heavenly realm will lose its pillar of support. Even if they are dissatisfied with this, they are powerless to stop it." Zhang Yan asked, "In the past, how long would it take for something like this to happen?" "That's hard to say," Taoist Do replied. "If it's short, it could take a few hundred years. If it's long, it could take 1,000 years. It's just that I don't know how many people would die each time." Zhang Yan pondered for a moment. This situation might be something that the Green Jade Palace would be happy to see. Not only would they be able to exhaust the strength of the various worlds, but these cultivators would also use their karma points to exchange for treasured weapons, talisman, and other useful items in order to gain more means of defeating their enemies. Taoist Do then said, "By the way, do you know of He Shangzhen of the Xianhong heaven?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "When I first came to the Yuhuan heavens, I did stay in the Xianhong heaven for a period of time. However, I didn't have the opportunity to meet this Taoist he." Taoist Do smiled mysteriously and said, "Usually, before a heavenly lord of a world avoids the tribulation, he will try to support or befriend a few great cultivators who have severed their past and future. This way, if he fails to overcome the tribulation, there will be someone to replace him. I heard that this He Shangzhen was once highly appreciated by the heavenly lord of the fifth sense heaven, and he's now headed to this world. If we meet again in the future, we'll have to address him as the heavenly lord." Zhang Yan thought about it and felt that this was somewhat possible. Although the heavens of the Yuhuan heavens were not clear, those who had truly severed their past and future were few and far between. If there was someone who could succeed as the heavenly lord, it would definitely be this person. However, he felt that this He Xianin might not necessarily compete for the heavenly lord's position. With the timing divine item in hand, how could he be willing to embark on the path of enlightenment? This was more likely a deliberate move to show the Green Jade Palace. However, this had nothing to do with him for the time being. The cultivation of mana was the foundation of a cultivator. After exchanging for several Ziqing medicines, he was prepared to return and continue to eliminate the devils in the Devil's Denver. There was no need for him to pay too much attention to the chaos outside. Chapter 1545. After discussing with Taoist Do for a while, Zhang Yan bid him farewell and went to the return hall. He stood in front of the glass wall and checked the number of karma points he had, but it was more than he had expected. On second thought, in addition to what he had obtained from killing the demons, there was also the contribution of that doppelganger. It was just that he had not recalled the doppelganger, nor had he communicated with it, so he did not know what it had done. Thinking of this, he sensed with his mind, but found that the doppelganger was not in this world, but it should not have been injured, or else it would have sensed it. Mi Zishu had said that after conquering that world, he would send over half of the foreign medicine he had obtained. There was no news from him now, so it seemed that there were no results yet. He was not anxious about this, but if he used all the karma points he had to exchange for the purple clear medicine, it would be equivalent to 300 or 400 years of his cultivation. However, this was only under normal circumstances. According to the consumption of cultivation on the Scarlet Continent, it was about 30 or 40 years at most. It was just that this was not enough to push him into the third stage, so he had to find a way to obtain more. After he had exchanged all his karma points for Ziqing medicine, he took out the Emerald Cloud Talisman and with a shift, he arrived at the Hall of Morality. He took a look at the demon subduing edict at the same time and discovered that there were many more compared to the last time. Among them, there was an edict with a particularly high number of karma points, almost comparable to his trip to the Spirit Cave. This caught his attention, and after careful examination, it said that many demons from the outer realm had entered the Yuhuan heavens. However, this time was different from the past. It was a demon race, and not only was there a large number of them, the Demon King was not easy to deal with. The cultivators who went to kill it all returned in failure, and a great cultivator almost did not return. Not only that, the Demon King did not invade the world or kill cultivators everywhere. After occupying a spiritual place with mountains and rivers, it actually began to try to incite the demons in the inner realm to join forces with them. No one knew what method it used, but in just a few years, its momentum was incomparably great. Zhang Yan did not think that these demons could do anything. With the Green Jade Palace around, no matter how powerful they could only be fierce for a while. He thought about it for a while and decided that it contained a lot of karma points, so he took it. After making his decision, he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he turned into a side hall and stepped inside. All the qi in the outside world instantly disappeared, and he seemed to be the only one left here. Walking in front of a pitch-black jade tablet, he looked inside and saw countless sceneries and words. This was a hidden tablet that could only be used by those whose names were recorded in the book. Here, cultivators could use karma points as payment to ask their peers to do things for them. Conversely, they could also obtain more karma points through this method. He looked around and shook his head. Most of the things here were trivial matters that weren't worth spending too much effort on. In fact, it was very normal. After all, only the cultivator's own karma points were used as payment. Something like purging the devil's den might not be done even in 1,000 years, so the amount of karma points required was naturally huge. There were very few people who could compare to it. Since there was nothing worth paying attention to, he walked out of the hall. Just as he reached the outer room, he saw a young cultivator with a smile walking over. The young cultivator cupped his hands and said, "Are you Zhang Shangzhen?" Zhang Yan turned his head and returned the greeting. He said, "I am Zhang Yan. How should I address you?" The young cultivator said, "I am Feng Lan, and I cultivate in the Green Jade Palace." Zhang Yan said, "Fellow Taoist, why did you call me?" Feng Lan smiled and said, "This isn't a good place to talk. Can Zhang Shangzhen follow me and have a chat?" Zhang Yan changed his mind. He couldn't avoid the cultivators of the Green Jade Palace in Qinghua Heaven. Since the other party took the initiative to talk, he might as well listen to what he had to say. He said, "Please lead the way, fellow Taoist." Feng Lan agreed and flew into the sky, all the way to the sky. After traveling for a long time, the cloud light turned and landed on a flying peak. The top of the mountain had long been flattened. Under an old pine tree, there was an exquisite pavilion with a stone table and stone stools inside. Feng Lan came to the pavilion and invited Zhang Yan to sit down. Then, he blew a whistle and 2 white-feathered birds came with cups in their mouths and placed them on the stone platform. After a while, tea emerged out of thin air and the aroma filled the air. A dense mist floated on top of the tea and did not dissipate for a long time. It looked like a Ganoderma lucidum. He smiled and picked it up. He said, "This is the Ganoderma tea from the Green Jade Palace. Drinking it for a long time can increase one's lifespan. Fellow Taoist, why don't you try it?" Zhang Yan expressed his thanks, picked it up, and took a sip. He noticed that it really wasn't a lie. When this tea entered his stomach, there was a refreshing and sweet feeling, and it was even able to nourish one's foundation. Moreover, it lingered in his stomach for a long time, and if he drank a lot of it, it would indeed be extremely beneficial. At his level of cultivation, there were not many external medicines that could be of use to him. This tea was probably not something that was commonly seen in Green Jade Palace. However, since he was here, he must have a request. If his guess was right, the other party must have something that he needed his help with. Feng Lan was not in a hurry to tell him his purpose. He just enjoyed the tea and discussed Tao with him. Seeing that Feng Lan did not speak, Zhang Yan did not ask further. There was a mighty person in the Green Jade Palace, and his sex Tao techniques could be used as a reference. Moreover, this person's cultivation level was not weak. It was more than he could ask for if he was willing to exchange cultivation experiences with him. Although Feng Lan was polite, his tone was still a little reserved, perhaps because he was born in the Green Jade Palace. However, after talking for half a day, he found that Zhang Yan was well versed in Dao and had a profound understanding of Dao techniques. He could not help but put away his thoughts and thought to himself, "This person is indeed the direct disciple of the Tai Ming patriarch. No wonder Uncle Master Guan asked me to look for this person. I've found the right person." After talking for half a day, Feng Lan finally mentioned the purpose of his visit. He said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, I heard that just now, you have just returned from the spirit cave of the Yin spirit?" Zhang Yan was not surprised. He did not deliberately hide this trip. Guan Longzhao was the guardian of the Green Jade Palace, so it was not surprising that Feng Lan knew about it. He said, "Yes, just now, I have just returned from that place." Feng Lan's expression turned serious. He said, "Forgive me for asking. Fellow Taoist, you could survive in the spirit cave for 10 years. Do you have any magical treasures to avoid the demons?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I do have some tricks up my sleeves. It seems like the matter of exterminating the demonic creatures was often done when I was in the sect, so I can be considered familiar with it." Feng Lan cupped his hands at him and said sincerely, "To tell you the truth, I invited you here today because I want to borrow your skills to deal with the demons." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Could you please tell me the whole story?" Feng Lan said, "The spirit cave of the Yin spirit has to be cleaned every few hundred or thousand years. Before fellow Taoist Yang, because no one had accepted this edict, an elder of the Green Jade Palace personally went to the spirit cave to clean up the Yin spirit. However, after that time, he was possessed by the demon Qi. Even the Prohibition Formation could not detect it. He had no choice but to return to the palace and tried to use the power of the Prohibition Formation to expel the evil. But now that 1,000 years have passed, the demon has still not been eliminated." Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "I don't know how the elder's cultivation is, but since he returned to the Green Jade Palace, it is obvious that he has a strong mind. If he had the help of the Prohibition Formation, he would have gotten rid of the demon Qi after 1,000 years. Feng Lan sighed and said, "That's how it should be." Elder Peng did the same after he returned, but this devil used some unknown method. Not only did he not manage to grind it away, it's already hard to tell which side has the upper hand now. Even the elders can't tell which side has the upper hand for now, but it's not good to alarm the palace master. In the end, they could only seal Elder Peng. "Today, I've come to find you to ask if you can dispel the devil Qi in this?" Zhang Yan heard this and became interested. The demon had its own intelligence and could pry into people's memories. It was not strange for it to have strange supernatural powers. But if even the Green Jade Palace could not do anything about it, it was not easy. He had a deep understanding of demons. After asking a few more questions, he had a rough idea. After thinking for a while, he said, "I don't have full confidence in this matter, but I am willing to give it a try." Feng Lan was delighted. He stood up and bowed, saying, "Then I thank you on behalf of Elder Peng." Zhang Yan waved his hand and said, "You don't have to thank me first. We still know the result of this matter, but I will do my best." Feng Lan nodded and said, "That's more than enough." After a pause, he said again, "The Green Jade Palace will not let you return empty-handed. Although this matter is not listed in the Demon Demand Edict, all the cultivators in the palace have karma points. If we can save Elder Peng this time, we will definitely reward you handsomely." Zhang Yan said with a smile, "I don't want karma points. If this matter is successful, can you exchange it for Ziqing medicine?" Hearing this, Feng Lan was very straightforward and said, "That is easy, but you will be at a disadvantage. I can give you more medicine." In fact, in Qinghua Heaven, karma points were harder to obtain than Ziqing elixir. Feng Lan's own karma points had been accumulated over a long period of time. If he gave away a lot of karma points at once, he would feel reluctant. But Ziqing elixir was different, it was easier to obtain. Moreover, he could tell that since Zhang Yan could make such a request, he must have some confidence. Zhang Yan smiled slightly. This was an unexpected gain. If he could succeed, he could not only give face to the Green Jade Palace, but also get a lot of medicine, which would be very beneficial for his cultivation in the future. At this time, Feng Lan asked, "When is it convenient for you?" Zhang Yan said, "I still have some small matters to deal with. How about I go with you tomorrow? Feng Lan nodded and said, Then I will look for you tomorrow. Sorry for bothering you today. He took out a stone jar from his sleeve and said, This longevity Ganoderma tea is my apology. I hope you don't mind. Zhang Yan did not stand on ceremony and accepted it. After a few words, he said goodbye to him and went down with the wind. Soon he returned to the spiritual boat. The Feast of Pearls was coming soon. Going to such a grand event would help him to become famous. Although he was well known now, he did not have much contact with the mighty figures of the heavens. At this feast, even the heavenly masters of the heavens might show up, so he could not miss it. Originally, he was going to send his strength path doppelganger, but it had not returned yet, so he needed to create another doppelganger. He sat cross-legged and silently operated his mana. After a day, a clear light flashed on his body and a person who looked similar to him walked out. He said to the doppelganger, You will go to the Feast of Pearls on behalf of me. Also, send the skeletons found in the spiritual cave back to their respective mountain sections. The doppelganger smiled, bowed, and floated away. Chapter 1546. After arranging everything, Zhang Yan summoned Chu Zhao and said, Tomorrow, a fellow cultivator from Green Jade Palace will come to look for me. It's not convenient for the magic boat to go there, so I'll leave it here and let you take care of it. If anything happens, you can retreat first and I'll deal with it when I come back. Chu Zhao said, Don't worry, master. I'll guard the boat well. Zhang Yan nodded. He trusted Chu Zhao. Not only did he know the rules of the heavens, but he was also kind and gentle. He wouldn't take the initiative to cause trouble, so there was no problem leaving the magic boat to him. On the second day, he rode a cloud out, and before long he arrived at the flying peak from the day before. Feng Lan had been waiting here for a long time. Seeing that he had kept his promise, he raised his hand and bowed. He said happily, Fellow cultivator Zhang is indeed a man of his word. After Zhang Yan landed, he also bowed. Feng Lan looked at him and said politely, If fellow cultivator doesn't have any inconveniences, how about we leave now? Zhang Yan nodded. Feng Lan waved his sleeves and the flying peak flew to the sky. After a while, he said, Elder Peng lives in Nianrua Palace. It's still a long way to go. Would fellow cultivator Zhang be interested in playing a game of chess with me? Zhang Yan looked over and saw the black and white chess pieces on the stone platform. He said, Have fellow cultivator ever played path-seeking chess? Feng Lan had never heard of this name. He asked, Fellow cultivator, what is path-seeking chess? Zhang Yan said, Path-seeking chess has nothing to do with winning or losing. During the game, it's a comparison of the cultivator's mind, mana, and even the verification of one's own Dao path. One game is no less than a battle with another person. Where I am, the cultivators in the inner realm often play this game to sharpen their own cultivation and willpower. Hearing this, Feng Lan couldn't help but be interested. He said, This game is not simple to be praised by fellow cultivator. Can fellow cultivator show it to me? Zhang Yan gladly agreed. He raised his finger and pointed. A pool of water appeared out of thin air. He then took out the chess pieces and the chessboard. After a brief explanation, he started playing chess with Feng Lan. This game of chess did not require much skill. As long as one was a Taoist cultivator, they would be able to understand it the moment they started. The inner section especially tested the cultivator's understanding of the Taoist path. If the difference in cultivation was too great, they would not be able to play at the same place. Fortunately, in terms of Qigong cultivation, even if Feng Lan had not severed his past body, he was still in the mortal transformation realm and could still be a worthy opponent. After a game, Feng Lan's eyes were shining. In path-seeking chess, the person who had a better understanding of himself would gain more. It was equivalent to combing through what one had learned. There was also an opponent to compete with, so it was easier to see the shortcomings that one had overlooked in the past. He had good insight and could naturally recognize the benefits of this game. He kept praising, This game of chess is indeed worthy of being called path-seeking chess. Zhang Yan saw that not only did Feng Lan not feel tired, but he was even more energetic. He knew that this was because Feng Lan had a strong foundation. Since yesterday's discussion, he knew that the Green Jade Palace valued the Qi of origin the most. They believed that it was the foundation of a person's Tao path and the source of all living things. Therefore, the disciples of the palace usually lived much longer than the cultivators in the outside world. This was not only because of their cultivation methods, but also because of external medicine. For example, the longevity Ganoderma tea was an external medicine used to replenish one's primordial spirit after one's cultivation had reached the upper realm. Of course, because this tea was also extremely precious, not everyone could obtain it. It was one of the few things that could not be exchanged for with karma points in the Qinghua heaven. After flying up the mountain for a day and a night, a floating world appeared above the clouds. A roaring river of ice rushed out from the edge of the giant mountain, bringing with it a huge amount of water, and fell down endlessly with a great momentum. Zhang Yan lowered the chess stick in his hand and looked up. He had heard from Feng Lan that this was the place where the lower hall of the Green Jade Palace was stationed. It usually floated in the sky and did not have permission. Outsiders could not find their way up. Most of the disciples of the Green Jade Palace in the Qinghua heaven cultivated here. On the other hand, the true Azure Palace was where the true Yang cultivator cultivated, and it was located in a mysterious world that ordinary cultivators could not enter. Similarly, the Enlightenment cultivator's real body was in the sky beyond heaven. Even if something happened, he would only send his doppelganger down. Feng Lan saw that they had arrived at the land boundary and also put down the chess stick. However, he still had a feeling that he had not had enough. He raised his head and said, "I really learned a lot from playing chess with you. I'll ask you again next time." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "You're welcome. I also learned a lot from this game." The flying peak moved toward the depths of the land. After passing the glacier waterfall, it turned southeast and stopped in a valley full of maple leaves. A light flew up from afar. A deacon Taoist in a red Taoist robe came down and bowed respectfully. He said, "Shinren Feng, Elder Peng is already waiting for you in the hall." Feng Lan asked with concern, "Elder Peng has woken up." This was not to guard against external enemies, but to prevent the demon from rising again if things did not go as planned. Elder Peng could not control the situation and the demon would rise up again. Elder Peng tried his best to speak. "What does fellow Taoist need Daoren to do?" Zhang Yan said, "Elder Peng, just do as you have done in the past." Elder Peng tried his best to smile. Then, he closed his eyes and even blocked his own senses. Zhang Yan subconsciously nodded. This elder indicated that he would not pry into his supernatural powers. However, his devil chi expelling technique was not something that could be detected by anyone other than him. Even if someone saw it, he would not be able to learn it no matter what. With a thought, a devil shadow appeared behind him. It paused for a moment and sucked forcefully in front of it. A black gas was pulled out from the bloated elder's body and fell into the devil shadow's mouth. The black line became thinner and finally disappeared. When Zhang Yan saw this, he dispersed his mana and the devil shadow also disappeared. However, he knew that there was a trace of turbid gas in Elder Peng's Dharmakaya that had not come out. It was closely connected to Elder Peng's essence chi. If he forcefully swallowed it, he might kill it as well. Hence, this could only solve the problem in front of him. However, he was already prepared for this and knew how to solve it. As for this time, it would be fine as long as he reached this step. At this moment, Elder Peng's originally shriveled body gradually filled up. Very quickly, he turned from a shriveled and skinny old man into a middle-aged Taoist with a red face and a black beard. He laughed loudly and his voice was loud and clear. He looked at his body and was very satisfied. He sat on the praying mat and cupped his hands together. He said, "Fellow Taoist, thank you for removing this devil chi for me." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and shook his head. "I only temporarily suppressed the devil chi in your body. However, this can only last for a dozen years at most. When the time comes, you will need to perform another spell." Elder Peng looked at him deeply and said, "That's right. The turbid gas has already taken root in my body. However, since you are here, you must have a way to get rid of it. I wonder if you can tell me?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "There's nothing wrong with that. As long as we kill this devil that releases the turbid gas, it will be completely eradicated." Elder Peng frowned and said, "So, you are going to send someone to the spirit cave of the Yin god?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I am just now returning from there." Elder Peng's eyes involuntarily narrowed. He had been half-conscious earlier and only vaguely knew that Zhang Yan would invite an expert to help him get rid of the devil's qi, but he did not know Zhang Yan's specific identity. It was not easy for Zhang Yan to be able to enter the devil's lair freely. Back then, Elder Peng had also entered the devil's lair, so he knew how terrifying that realm was. He was no longer as careless as before. Instead, he revealed a cautious expression and said bluntly, "I don't care what Taoist Master Feng used to invite fellow Taoist here. As long as fellow Taoist can kill this devil, I have a gift to thank you." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I heard that your sect's external tonic medicine is very good." Elder Peng was stunned and immediately understood that Zhang Yan had his eyes on the longevity Ganoderma tea and bright jade ointment. Without hesitation, he immediately nodded and said, "All right, as long as you can do this, I can make the decision to give them to you." The reason why he agreed to it so easily was that the planting and cultivation methods of these two items were not secrets. Even if he gave them away, there was no harm in giving them away. These external medicines could only be maximized when they were compatible with the cultivation methods of Green Jade Palace. Even if the cultivators outside the sect obtained them, they could only use them as ordinary external elixirs to strengthen one's vitality. However, he didn't know that Zhang Yan already had the 9 sutras. After a discussion with Feng Lan, he already knew some basic knowledge. In addition, just now, Zhang Yan was helping him to remove the devil poison, so he also had some clues about the key points. If he were to explore for a period of time, it wouldn't be difficult for him to derive a method to strengthen vitality. Although it might not be better than Green Jade Palace's method, Zhang Yan's cultivation was still improving. He might not be as good now, but it was hard to say in the future. Chapter 1547. A genius in a second to remember if you want to go? TalkNet, providing you with exciting novels to read. Inside the valley, the stone door on the mountain wall opened with a rumble. As the light of a pearl spilled out, Zhang Yan and Elder Peng walked out side by side. Feng Lan was waiting outside. He was surprised to see this. He took a few steps forward and looked at Elder Peng. He could feel that the vitality in the latter's body had suddenly become extremely vigorous, like a ball of fire burning fiercely. This was clearly the internal manifestation of the Green Jade Palace's cultivation method being channeled to the extreme. He could not help but ask, "Elder, have you expelled the devil qi?" Elder Peng laughed loudly and said, "This is all thanks to fellow Taoist Zhang." As he spoke, he cupped his hands at Zhang Yan and looked straight at him with a slightly solemn expression. "I'll leave the rest to you, fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan replied, "We'll see in 10 years. Elder Peng Daoren said, "I'll wait." Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, "Elder Peng, after this matter, I should leave." Feng Lan wanted to persuade him to stay, but Elder Peng said, "Sage Feng, fellow Taoist Zhang still has something to do. He has an appointment with me and will come again next time. Just treat him well then." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Everyone farewell." A mist of light rose under his feet and enveloped his body. Then, he turned into a magnificent clear light and flew into the sky, quickly disappearing. Feng Lan turned around and asked cautiously, "Elder Peng, according to what you said just now, is there any future trouble?" Elder Peng did not explain too much. He only said, "Tell me, what is fellow Taoist Zhang's background?" Feng Lan said, "Elder, you may not know, but fellow Taoist Zhang is the direct disciple of the great underworld grandmaster." Elder Peng was a little surprised. He said, "Is he from Xianhong Heaven? Since when did the Luoshan Monastery have such a person?" Feng Lan explained, "Fellow Taoist Zhang Yan is not a cultivator of Xianhong Heaven. It is said that he is a fated person who came to Xianhong Heaven under the order of the great underworld patriarch to retrieve the mystic stones." Then, he briefly described Zhang Yan's achievements after he arrived at the Yuhuan Heavens. When Elder Peng heard this, he couldn't help but be moved. Since Zhang Yan was able to cure the demonic poison, he guessed that his background wasn't simple. However, he didn't expect his background to be so great. Even his fighting abilities seemed to be extremely tyrannical. Previously, he had been trying his best to overestimate Zhang Yan, but in the end, he still underestimated him. After thinking for a while, he told the deacon Taoist, "The next time you come, treat him well." The deacon bowed and said, "I will remember." Elder Peng then said to Feng Lan, "May I trouble Jinren Feng to inform the palace that although the demonic poison has been removed, my vitality has yet to recover, so I will not be going to the palace for the time being. I still need to cultivate here for a few more years." Feng Lan seemed to want to ask something, but in the end, he didn't say anything. After bowing, he also left. At this moment, the deacon Taoist asked in confusion, "Elder, there seems to be some poison left in your body. Why didn't you tell Jinren Feng about it?" Elder Peng looked at the sky and said, "To get rid of the demonic qi, I still need to rely on that fellow Taoist Zhang. It's not like you don't know why I went to that spiritual cave back then. Now, I'm afraid that some people can't bear to see me recover. They can't do anything to me, but they might turn around and make things difficult for fellow Taoist Zhang." The deacon Taoist came to a realization and said, "Elder Peng, are you trying to protect that Zhang Shangzhen?" Elder Peng shook his head and said, "Not really. These people definitely can't do anything to that fellow Taoist Zhang, but since this person is here under the orders of the great underworld patriarch, we should try our best not to offend him, lest we bring trouble to the palace." The deacon Taoist agreed and said, "Elder, you're really thoughtful." At this moment, Elder Peng seemed to have sensed something. He looked in a direction and couldn't help but sneer. He turned around and walked into the cave abode and said, "Go back, it's not a good time for me to show my face yet." On the other side of Qinghua Heaven, there was a cloud raft floating in the sky, and a burly Taoist was sitting there motionlessly. His skin looked like it was made of copper and iron, and he was ugly. He wore half of a golden copper mask on his face, and there was a single horn poking out of his forehead. A golden light broke through the clouds and flew towards this place. The Taoist blew out a breath of air, and the light suddenly stopped. It circled twice and fell down, turning into a flying letter. He stretched out his hand and took the letter. After reading it for a while, he couldn't help but look excited. He took out a dual realm dial and placed it on the empty ground. Then he stood up and shook his sleeve, exposing one of his arms. Then he raised his other hand and made a cut on his arm with a finger. Instantly, strands of golden blood flowed out. When there was a handful in his palm, he sprinkled it on the dial. Then he immediately took a few steps back and bowed, showing a respectful attitude. In a short while, a golden rainbow shot out from the dial. Within the floating spiritual light, there was a person standing inside. Although one could see his full appearance from here, it gave one a feeling like he was indomitable, like there was no limit that could contain this person. That person looked down and a majestic voice spread out, "Is there news about the matter I told you?" The burly Taoist looked more like a senior as he bowed and said, "I was about to report to Old Ancestor. I just now received the letter. That Taoist Zhang is coming down from the cloud continent and there is no one around him. Should we attack now?" That person said, "Are you able to confirm where this person is?" The burly Taoist gave a confident expression and said, "I am 100% confident." The figure said very decisively, "I'll send a page of the compendium over later. I'll leave this matter to you." The burly Taoist said emotionally, "I won't let down Old Ancestor's trust. However, with this person's ability, he might notice something. Should I ask the people from Green Jade Palace to hide it?" That person said, "There is no need to do that. You just need to take out that page before this person rushes to the formation gate." The burly Taoist lowered his head and said, "Yes, I will listen to Old Ancestor's instructions." That person didn't say much, immediately disappearing after giving these instructions. The burly Taoist still stood there, his eyes staring at the dial. A moment later, the spiritual light flashed a few times and a page the size of a human slowly squeezed out from within. He quickly went up and carefully took it. When he held it in his hand, he chanted a few spells and the page flew up, drilling into the center of his brows. He came down and kept the dual world dial. Then, he controlled the cloud raft and headed in a certain direction. Since Zhang Yan exited the cloud continent, he headed down. However, after flying for a short while, he felt a sense of danger, like evil energy was covering his body. He couldn't help but squint his eyes. This feeling was unprecedentedly strong, which meant that the enemy had methods that could threaten his life. If he wanted to avoid it, it was easy. He just had to go to the Red Continent. However, he quickly rejected this idea. Even if he went there, he would still return to where he came from. Although the person who came might not always be there, since they were able to find him, they must have some unknown methods. If he did that, he would be handing over the initiative to go out. Moreover, since the enemy could scheme against him once, he could do it again. If he avoided it now, he might bump into him next time. At that time, after knowing that he had such ability, he might be even more careful. After considering the pros and cons of this place, he decided not to avoid it, but to face the enemy head-on. However, it wasn't that he didn't make preparations. He gathered his spiritual power and formed many talismans, preparing to use them to defend himself. After traveling for another 2 hours, he suddenly felt his body stop, like he was trapped by a whaley. He was actually unable to continue moving. This actually came without any warning at all. He raised his head and looked in the direction of the source, only to see a golden page that covered the sky above his head. At this moment, it was slowly pressing down with the force of the sky collapsing. His gaze suddenly became incomparably deep. He did not throw out any of the talismans that he had refined earlier because he knew that it would be of no use. The other party did not use any special or complicated transformations, but purely used an immeasurably huge amount of mana to suppress him, and at the same time, covered his past and future. He could feel that no matter how many doppelgangers he created, no matter what kind of remarkable Dao technique he used, he would not be able to avoid this attack. With his current ability, even if he fought against a cultivator who had severed his past and future, he had a good chance of winning. So, he was sure that this was definitely a Heaven Lord. However, it was impossible for a Heaven Lord to reach the Azure Brilliance Heaven, so the other party should have used some sort of artifact to cross over. Since that was the case, he definitely wouldn't be able to hold on for long. With this conclusion in mind, he snorted coldly. He didn't choose to escape to the Scarlet Continent. Instead, he let out a clear shout and flipped his hand up. A giant hand that could hold up the sky grabbed the page. With a rumble, the place where the two of them came into contact immediately let out a shattering sound. It was as if the heavens and earth were being split apart. Around his body, Xiankong nether holes appeared one after another, appearing and disappearing one after another. At this moment, the spiritual power in his body surged out like a flood. The indescribable thing surged endlessly into his body, but this wasn't enough. The demon's subduing slip between his brows trembled and instantly refined the devil essence. It also drew out the indescribable thing to replenish the spiritual power he had lost. It seemed like an extremely long period of time had passed, but in reality, only a few breaths had passed. Countless fine cracks appeared where his palm came into contact with the page, and then they gradually spread out. In the end, they shattered into pieces of golden shards that were swept away by a gust of wind and turned into nothingness. Without this item, the figure of a single-horned Taoist appeared even higher up. At this moment, he was looking down with incomparable astonishment and confusion. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly. This person should be the person who had used the artifact. However, this person was already dead, and his origin energy had been exhausted. His soul no longer existed. At this moment, what he saw was merely a shadow of his past. This person wasn't important. He was just a guide for the person who had acted behind the scenes. It would probably be difficult to find out the true identity of the person who had schemed against him. He smiled faintly. Even if the external traces had disappeared, it didn't mean that there were no other clues left. He raised his sleeve and took out the book. Using his finger as a pen, he wrote down the scene revealed by the page. This was a reward for his karma points. He asked what it was. Even though he didn't recognize it, given how vast the universe heavens was, there would definitely be people who knew about it. As expected, it didn't take long before lines of words appeared on it. Chapter 1548. Genius in a Second. Remember Love Go? TalkNet, providing you with exciting novels to read. Zhang Yan raised his eyes to look at it. After looking at it, he finally knew what kind of magical treasure it was. It was called the Compendium of Errors, and only the Lord of Heaven could refine it. This item could imprint a part of the Lord of Heaven's essence and chi on it. When it was thrown out during battle, it was equivalent to the Lord of Heaven being there personally. However, this part could not be retrieved regardless of whether one used it or not. For the Lord of Heaven, this meant that he had removed this part of himself forever. Even a Lord of Heaven who had passed through 4 tribulations could only imprint 12 pages at most. If there were people who did not have enough merit, they would be able to imprint even fewer pages. However, more of the chi would be stripped away, and the mana and supernatural powers that could be unleashed would also be greater. The true power of this item was that it could cover the past and the future. It would erase all the essence and chi in one's body. To the outside world, it would only be an instant, and there would not be such a long battle. He checked again and found that some of his karma points had been deducted, which meant that what was said was true. This was interesting. This matter involved the secrets of the Lord of Heaven, but there was a result so quickly. The identity of the person who gave this information was also thought-provoking. He knew a long time ago that after his identity as the person with the fate of the divine item was exposed, he had already stepped into a whirlpool. However, as long as he possessed sufficient strength to stand firm, then no matter how violent the outside world was, it would be unable to touch him in the slightest. As for who the person was, he had a rough guess in his heart. He could not be completely sure now, but there would be time in the future to investigate. He made up his mind and was about to turn around and leave when he suddenly felt something and looked to the side. He saw the clouds in the distance slowly parting, creating a path. 2 Taoists in green with fluttering sleeves appeared from within. These 2 people were covered with clear chi, and actually had the cultivation of mortal metamorphosis. However, judging from their chi dynamic, they should be beginners and had not been able to cut through the body. The person walking on the left seemed to be the one making the decision. He called out loudly, "Is that Zhang Shangzhen?" Zhang Yan replied, "Yes." The Taoist came forward and bowed, "My name is Lan." He pointed to the other person, "This is my junior apprentice brother. His surname is Meng." Zhang Yan asked, "Do the 2 of you have anything for me?" Taoist Lan said, "Yes." "May I ask, does Zhang Shangzhen have an edict for you?" Zhang Yan nodded, "Not long ago, I received one just now." Taoist Lan then asked, "If Shangzhen doesn't have the time, I have it." Zhang Yan was fine with it. Even if the people from the Green Jade Palace did not ask him, they would still be able to find out through other channels. Hence, there was nothing for him to hide. He took out the demon-subduing edict from his sleeve and held it in his hand. The 2 of them took one look and confirmed that there was no mistake. Meng Daoist bowed and said, "Zhang Shangzhen, I apologize for offending you. According to the rules of the Green Jade Palace, cultivators from the various realms are not allowed to attack those who have received the demon summons. However, I saw someone attacking Shangzhen just now, so I came to ask." Taoist Lan Meng interrupted, "But I wonder how Shangzhen will deal with this?" Zhang Yan heard this and looked at the 2. He said, "Since this is the rule of your sect, why do you need to ask I? I believe your sect will take care of it." The 2 looked at each other. Taoist Meng Long said, "If the person who was attacked does not pursue this matter, then we can ignore this matter. It all depends on Shangzhen's decision." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. When he heard this, he understood the purpose of the 2. He thought for a while and smiled, "Then what do the 2 of you think?" Seeing that he seemed to be willing to negotiate, the 2 heaved a sigh of relief. Taoist Lan Meng Long said, "Zhang Shangzhen, we saw that the person who attacked is dead. Since this is the case, why don't we stop now?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Is this the rule of your sect?" Taoist Meng Long sighed, "We also know that there must be someone behind the one-horned Taoist, and that the person is not a small one. But if we spend the effort to investigate, I am afraid that it will drag on for a long time and there may not be any results. Taoist Lan Menglong said, "This matter is really unfair to Shang Zhen. If Shang Zhen really agrees not to talk about this matter, we can use some Ziqing medicine to make up for it. If you don't like it, we can use other things to replace it. What do you think?" Zhang Yan listened to the two of them arguing with each other. Both overtly and covertly, they wanted him to give up on pursuing this matter. Changing his mind, he faintly smiled and said, "Since the two of you have said so, then this poor Taoist will do your sect a favor and settle this matter as it is." The two of them were delighted when they heard that. They originally thought that this matter would be hard to convince, but who knew that it would be so smooth? Taoist Lan Menglong said, "Shang Zhen, don't worry. After we return, we will send the medicine over. We won't let you suffer any losses." Zhang Yan nodded his head. "I still need to rush to a place. If there is nothing else, then I will take my leave." Taoist Lan Menglong said, "We don't dare to obstruct Shang Zhen's journey." Following which he raised his head and said, "If Shang Zhen comes to the Cloud Continent again, the two of us will ask the sect elders to take good care of you." After he finished, he didn't stay any longer. He bowed and left with Taoist Menglong. Zhang Yan looked at the direction that the two of them disappeared in. His eyes were calm. Just now, although he was attacked, he didn't think about relying on the power of Green Jade Palace to deal with this matter. He saw it clearly. If it was a normal cultivator, Green Jade Palace could immediately take him down according to the rules. However, if it involved a world's heaven lord, then things would be complicated. Directly confronting a heaven master would cause a great commotion. It was very likely to shake the entire universe. In Green Jade Palace, if the true Yang Almighty expert did not take action, there would not be many people who would be willing to do so. Taking a step back, even if the true Yang Almighty expert really took action to deal with this heaven master, what would the other world masters think of it? Green Jade Palace placed the most importance on the karma system. If all the heaven lords were enemies, then they might not be able to smoothly expand to the various worlds. Logically speaking, a true Yang Almighty could use force to subdue them. However, since he didn't do that from the start, it meant that this method might not work. In such a situation, his personal gains and losses didn't count for much. However, there was no reason for him to let them off easily. Once his cultivation increased, he would personally take revenge. He flicked his sleeves, turned around, and fled downwards. Not long after, he returned to the skyscraping spirit boat. When he sat down in the cavern, he called Chu Zhao over and said, "Tell me everything you know about Green Jade Palace." Chu Zhao didn't ask for the reason and told him everything he knew in detail. Even some of the news that he heard, regardless of whether it was true or not, he told him everything. Zhang Yan listened and was deep in thought. No matter what the people of Green Jade Palace were like, he would have to deal with them. After walking around the Cloud Continent, he could vaguely feel that this sect seemed to have a different attitude towards the outside world. He came from a large sect and knew that this difference was most likely caused by internal differences. From these past events, he had more or less figured out a vague clue. He waved his sleeves and told Chu Zhao to back off. He then drove the sky-scraping spell boat towards the Yin God Spirit Cave. When the Taoist saw this familiar boat come over, he didn't ask anything and opened the restriction door. Not long later, he appeared in that sealed valley once more. He stepped out of the boat and headed towards the depths of the valley on the path between the two walls. Guanlong Zhao was originally sitting there and watching, but due to the aura, he came out from his place. He took a look and was startled. "Why did you come here again?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Naturally, I'm here to exterminate the demons." Guanlong Zhao was stunned and shook his head. Others avoided this place like the plague, but this person seemed to enjoy it. After he inquired about the demon edict, he said, "Wait for me to open the door for you." Zhang Yan said, "Sorry for troubling you." Guanlong Zhao said, "You're too polite. I still have to thank you for Elder Peng's matter." Zhang Yan looked at him and nodded. It seemed that this person and Elder Peng were the same kind of people. Under Guanlong Zhao's action, the bronze door slowly cracked open. Zhang Yan's mind moved and his body turned into a clear light, flashing into the door. He re-entered the demon's cave, But the previous battle caused such a huge commotion, it wasn't so easy to suppress it. Especially the appearance of the error compendium, many people who knew the inside story could easily determine that it was the doing of a heavenly lord. And since it could provoke a heavenly lord to make a move, it was definitely not a small matter, so they all sent people to investigate this matter. Within peaceful heaven, a handsome cultivator with a broad forehead and sideburns that seemed to have been cut sat on a dark pillar. This pillar was 5,000 kilometers long, and it pierced through the netherworld and connected the heavens and the earth. At the bottom of it was a boundless azure crimson sea of flames that stretched as far as the eye could see. A clear sound, like glass shattering, followed by the sound of flapping wings coming closer. A black-feathered owl flew in and stood on a branch that was propped up horizontally by the pillar of tranquility. It turned its head and instantly changed into a human face, saying, "Master, I have already investigated. It should be Zhu Zhutian who did it. Heh, seems like he couldn't bear the fact that his own son was killed." The handsome cultivator said indifferently, "What's the result?" The owl raised its voice and said, "It's inconceivable. That Taoist Zhang actually escaped unscathed under the error compendium." The handsome cultivator was slightly surprised, but then he nodded and said, "He's the direct disciple of that grandmaster after all. He must have some life-saving item." The owl said, "I also heard that when that Taoist Zhang was attacked, he had the demon subjugation edict with him. But I heard that Green Jade Palace sent 2 people to persuade him, and the matter was left unsettled. In the end, he's someone who has no foundation in the heavens." When the handsome cultivator heard this, he suddenly raised his head and stared at the owl, asking, "Is this true?" The owl was startled and said with a trembling voice, "Master, this is absolutely true. This news came from that side, it can't be wrong." The handsome cultivator retracted his chi dynamic and returned to the calm expression he had just now. But in his heart he was thinking, it seems that this is Zhu Zhutian's true intention. He broke the rules of Green Jade Palace, but until now he didn't even show up to ask about it. It's not like him in the past. Could it be that the rumor is true? If so, should I try to bring this matter forward? When he thought of this, he shook his head, and a sharp light appeared in his eyes. No, I have to test it again. Chapter 1549. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? TalkNet, providing you with exciting novels to read. After Zhang Yan entered the demon's lair, he immediately immersed his mind into the broken jade and once again deduced the changes in luck in the Voidbrink. Love, go, small, TalkNet could because he had already figured out some of the mysteries last time. It only took him 3 months to figure out the path. However, he also knew that he had reached his limit. Unless he completely understood the restrictive methods here, he wouldn't be able to shorten the time even if he deduced the next time. This time, other than hunting demons and continuing his cultivation, he also needed to find the demon who planted the devil chi in Elder Peng's body. After retrieving the devil chi, he had already grasped the demon's chi. It was just that this place was almost limitless and boundless. If he were to search by himself, he might not be able to find anything even after dozens or hundreds of years. Fortunately, he still had the demon's subduing slip with him. It could point him in the right direction and help him find the demon. After releasing the slip, he followed unhurriedly. Every demon he encountered along the way, he didn't refuse them and swallowed them all. As he moved forward ceaselessly, he noticed that the devils were even more ferocious than before, and they were even more difficult to deal with. Especially their ability to conceal themselves, their auras had become extremely obscure, and if it wasn't for the existence of the devil slip, then it would truly require a great deal of effort to find them. This was actually very natural. Great demons usually had intelligence, and they would constantly learn in battle and then evolve more divine abilities and methods. In the past, it was enough to deal with cultivators with the ability to seize souls and the Xian-Yin illusory field, but it was different for him. The devil image was born to suppress this generation. As long as it appeared, no matter what method it used, it would be useless. Therefore, under his pressure, these devils could only desperately dig into their own bodies and transform themselves so that they wouldn't be destroyed. If these devils managed to sneak out the next time he opened the door, the damage they would cause would be unprecedented, and it would be enough to shake the entire Yuhuan heavens. Although the demon had endless potential, he didn't stay in the same place. The demon form was becoming more and more proficient, and the power of its supernatural abilities was also increasing. The biggest gain was that as his cultivation advanced, his magical power grew faster and faster every day. As the saying goes, a small pool of water can dry up in a day. The river turns and the rain turns into a swamp. If the original mana was just a stream, now it was a surging torrent. If he were to receive the Air Yuan Compendium at this moment, he would definitely be able to receive it easily. However, it was important to note that the Air Yuan Compendium only displayed the strength of the god when it was engraved. He still did not know when this page of the compendium was completed. If it was written thousands of years ago, the mana of the person behind it would not be stagnant after such a long time. Perhaps his true strength was even higher than he had imagined. After following Mo Jianxing for half a year, one day, his blood was suddenly stirred. His entire body was filled with qi of devilry. He silently examined it. As his mana became stronger, he unknowingly comprehended a supernatural power. Only, this divine ability came at the right time and was extremely suitable for the current situation. This really was a bit inconceivable. However, after thinking about it for a while, he felt that this was actually not a coincidence. Instead, after cultivating the comprehending spirit contract to this level, it was already able to revolve according to the situation in the outside world and produce the most beneficial changes to oneself. Moreover, this probably had something to do with him constantly killing and capturing demons. If he was not in the spiritual cave at this moment, he believed that he might not be able to possess the supernatural power. He pondered in his heart, this method is very useful. If there's a chance later, I can give it a try. In the next year, he continued to advance and continued to sweep away demons along the way. Suddenly, he felt a qi dynamic that seemed familiar. At the same time, the speed of the devil slip suddenly increased. Like a flowing light, it fled in a direction. His eyes flickered. How could he not understand that he was near the location of the great demon? His body shook and instantly broke through the void, chasing after it. This demon was not simple. It seemed to have noticed that it was being targeted, so it also tried to hide. However, it was of no use because with the demon subduing slip, it was impossible to escape no matter where it hid. Moreover, with the existence of the void brink, if one did not understand the changes here, then most of the time, one would only be going around in circles. As long as Zhang Yan was willing to put in the effort, he would not be able to escape no matter what. The demon quickly realized this. In the end, seeing that there was really no other way, it could only shake its shadow and change into the appearance of a human. It cupped its hands and said, "You are truly remarkable. Why do you have to make things difficult for me?" Zhang Yan looked over and saw that it had changed into the appearance of Elder Peng. He smiled faintly and said, "It really is you." The demon had an extremely accurate grasp of people's hearts. From what he said, it immediately understood the whole story. It sighed and said, "I see. Fellow Taoist, you must be here for the story from 1,000 years ago?" It raised its head and swallowed as if it was taking something back. Then it said, "I have already removed the shackles on that fellow Taoist. From now on, he will no longer have anything to do with me. Are you satisfied with this, exalted?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly. The demon was good at seeing through people's hearts. If it was not willing to release the supernatural power or use it to threaten him, then as long as he killed it, he could also release it. However, since it had stopped so easily, there was no reason for him to continue to make things difficult for it. If it was someone else, they might really let it go. Fighting with the Genin demon was also very dangerous. If one was not careful, they might even get themselves into trouble. But Yi Futian was different. In his eyes, this person was only an external medicine. How could he let it go? If it wasn't for the fact that he had other ideas at the moment, there would be no need to say so much and he would have taken care of it. The demon was very vigilant. It could feel that Zhang Yan would not let it go easily. It could not help but reveal a bitter smile and said, Exalted, do you really not believe that I have already removed that person's internal poison? I am willing to make a vow here and now. Zhang Yan was not moved at all. Although this demon looked like it was begging, in reality, it did not have any emotions. It had always followed the instincts of a demon. Those external appearances were all done deliberately for the sake of survival. Just as he'd thought, this demon seemed to be extremely weak and didn't have much intention to resist, yet it was secretly plotting a countermeasure at any time. If it was to deal with ordinary cultivators, then there was utterly no need to waste so much effort because it could target the flaws in the heart of its opponent at any time, and this was the most formidable aspect of demons. However, it had encountered Zhang Yan this time, and no matter how it peeped, all it saw was a stretch of mist. However, when it saw that Zhang Yan did not choose to attack immediately, it understood a little. It came up to him and said respectfully, "Exalted, if you have any orders, I am willing to do it on your behalf." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Go and find a way to lure a few demons like you here. If it is done properly before I leave, I will not make things difficult for you." The devil didn't ask any more questions. He put on a submissive expression and said, "Yes, I will carry out Shangzhen's instructions." Zhang Yan asked, "Do you have a name?" The demon said, "I have a name in private, Peng Xiang. Sorry for calling you that." After he had implanted the devil qi into Elder Peng, he had also obtained a portion of the elder's experience and memories. Even his name was based on one of Elder Peng's deceased descendants. Zhang Yan summoned the demon's slip and flicked it. A bright light shone into Peng Xiang's body, causing him to be in a daze. He said calmly, "Go." Peng Xiang felt like he had been pardoned. He turned into a streak of murky energy and flew away. He wanted to escape, but just now he didn't know what he was doing. He checked both inside and out and didn't find anything weird. However, the more that was the case, the more it meant that there was a problem. He could only search for the demon elsewhere. Zhang Yan stood on the spot and didn't move. Just now, he was using the ability that he got from before. This technique could restrain demons and make them work for him. As long as he saw a normal demon, he could do whatever he wanted. However, it wasn't so easy to make a genuine demon listen to him. He needed to cook it slowly, and in the end, he might not succeed. He was prepared to test his methods on this demon. Since it was willing to follow him, then it would save him a lot of effort. Demons weren't good or evil. Their goal was to strengthen themselves. Peng Xiang's life and death were controlled by others. In order to not be wiped out, he was willing to do anything. Moreover, he hoped to find other demons to surround and attack Zhang Yan. Maybe then he would be able to break free, which was why he was really motivated. In just a few days, he found 2 genuine demon. Zhang Yan just released the demon image and sucked it in. Then he ordered him to find more. However, it wasn't so simple. After 2 times, he didn't get anything else. After those demons sensed that something wasn't right, they all went into hiding and didn't easily show themselves. However, after a few times, Peng Xiang became more and more obedient. Zhang Yan didn't bother him anymore. He felt that he had gained enough from this trip. Next, he should make use of the time to cultivate. After sending Peng Xiang away, he turned his spiritual will. In an instant, he was in the Red Continent. He took out all the purple clear medicine on him and went all out to cultivate. At this moment, on the Cloud Continent, Elder Peng was breathing. Clear energy floated around his body and a rainbow wrapped around it. Although a large portion of the demon energy was removed, the root wasn't broken. He didn't dare to let his guard down. Every day, he did his homework to prevent it from growing. Originally, the circulation of his qi was going smoothly, but suddenly his body shook slightly, and he opened his eyes, revealing a slightly surprised expression. After silently inspecting once more, he was able to confirm that the last bit of poison in his body had been completely dispersed, and it no longer existed. He circulated his spiritual power several times and the energy in his body climbed. He laughed out loud and stood up from his seat. The deacon Taoist outside heard the noise and came in. After taking a few looks, he revealed a surprised expression and said, "Disciple congratulates Elder for recovering your spiritual power." 1,000-year illness was gone in an instant. Elder Peng was in a good mood and said, "This calamity actually helped me achieve something." He thought about it. The time limit that Zhang Yan gave was around 10 years. He didn't expect that it would be solved in just 2 years. It seemed like the reward he gave before was a little too little. He said, "If that Taoist Zhang comes back, tell me. I will personally go out to welcome him and thank him." The deacon Taoist said, "Speaking of which, that Zhang Shangzhen was attacked on the way to the demon cave. I heard that he had the demon subduing edict on him. However, after that, the few people in my palace came to calm things down." Elder Peng laughed coldly and said, "I knew they would do that. What's the use of giving in? However, they want a foot after we give them an inch. Let's not bother about them for now. Let's see how they deal with this." Chapter 1550. Zhang Yan wasn't in a hurry to go back because Elder Peng's poison had been cured. Moreover, he had exchanged many great medicines before this. He stayed in the Red Land for 20 years. With the use of a large amount of external medicine, his cultivation of Qi Dao became more profound. He thought that he could try to cut off his future body after a few decades of polishing. At this moment, there wasn't much Xiqing medicine left in his hands. He flipped open the merit book and saw that he had accumulated more merit points than the last time. Moreover, his doppelganger also added some merit points to it. He could go back in exchange for another batch of great medicines. Therefore, he moved his spirit and returned to the spirit cave of the Yin god. When he arrived there, he felt a sense in his heart. He summoned, and not long after, a turbid qi appeared from the void. It landed on the ground and turned into a Taoist. The Taoist bowed to him respectfully and said, "Peng Xiang greets the great sage." Zhang Yan looked over. At this moment, he could feel every change in the demon's thoughts. This feeling was extremely clear. It was obviously submissive, because in these years in the Red Land he didn't pay much attention to this Zhen-yin demon. Of course, this was also intentional. He wanted to try and see what the final result would be. Judging from the current situation, as long as the demon didn't resolve the method he planted before, then as time passed, it would be controlled by the supernatural power. This could be considered a good news. If there was a Zhen-yin demon that he could control, it would be much more convenient to do things. However, thinking about this, he faintly grasped the key to this place. The reason why this demon surrendered to him so easily might be because it was trapped here. Maybe one day, it would be swallowed by one of its kind. Only by following him could it have infinite possibilities. The demon didn't care about the division of master and follower. Its purpose in this world was to strengthen itself. So as long as it followed him, if it could achieve this purpose, it would not hesitate to attach itself to him. After thinking about this, he said, "Wait for me to open and close the door. After I go out, you can follow me. However, there are restrictions outside. Whether you can pass through or not depends on your own luck." Even though the demon lord's art of hiding was much better than before, he might not be able to escape due to the powerful prohibitions outside. Meng Qi would not purposely help him. After all, Qinghua Heaven was under the supervision of Green Jade Palace's karma point system. At least on the surface, he had to distance himself from the relationship between them. It would be great if he could succeed, but it would be fine if he could not. He would not care too much about it. Peng Xiang said, "I am willing to give it a try." At this moment in the outer room, Guanlong Zhao had not seen Zhang Yan come out from the inner room for 10 years and initially thought that he had met with some accident. Afterwards, he went to inquire and found out that the demon subduing imperial decree had never returned to the vital energy hall. He guessed that Zhang Yan was still in the inner room at that time. Therefore, when the time came, he still followed the rules and reopened the prohibition spell. After waiting for a few hours, Zhang Yan saw a crack in the bronze door. His body turned into a ray of light and escaped from the inside. When he reached the outer room, he saw that there was a golden light barrier in front of him. He then revealed himself and stood close to it. Guanlong Zhao descended from the sky and stared at him for a few moments. His expression was extremely serious. He waved his hand and rays of golden light shone down on Zhang Yan's body. When he saw that there was no demonic qi, his expression relaxed a little. He cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoist, you are indeed fine. Sorry for the offense. Zhang Yan said, I've made you worry, fellow Taoist. The demons are intelligent. When they saw that I'm here, they hid and hid everywhere. It's not easy to kill them, so I've been delayed for some time. Guan Longzhao was stunned and then praised, fellow Taoist, your methods are really impressive. In the past, most of the cultivators who went to exterminate the demon lord could only defend one side. It was already good enough that they could stay alive for 10 years. There was no one like Zhang Yan who could make the demon lord retreat on its own. Zhang Yan looked in the direction of the bronze door and reminded him, in the past 20 years, I have repeatedly fought with the demon lord. This generation has also changed. Fellow Taoist Guan, you have to be careful the next time you open the door. Guan Longzhao had been guarding this place for 1,000 years. It could be said that he was the person in the Green Jade Palace who was most familiar with the demon lord. When he heard this, he knew that the demon lord's methods in fighting against humans had improved again. This was also the most terrifying thing about the demon lord. When they fought with humans, they would become more and more powerful. In the end, no one knew to what extent they would grow to. Unless they were completely isolated from the real world, this could not be stopped. However, this was impossible. The spirit cave's turbid chi accumulated more and more. Just like the water that kept rising, the dam had to be built higher and higher. However, if they did not find a way to divert and reduce it, there would be a day when it would collapse. This was almost an unsolvable disaster. When he thought of this, he also sighed helplessly. Zhang Yan also saw what he was worried about. However, he thought that there was no need to think too much. This was not because he could restrain the demon lord, nor was it because he was not from the Yuhuan heavens. It was because the mighty person in the Green Jade Palace had gathered all the turbid chi in the various worlds in one place. This meant that he must have his own considerations. He said, after I return the Imperial Edict to the Golden Hall of Imperial Edict, I might come here again to disturb you. Guan Longzhao was surprised. He looked at him and said, you still want to come here? Zhang Yan smiled and said, walking in the Green Jade Heaven, the more karma points you have, the better. However, killing evil may not be as good as suppressing the demon lord. Guan Longzhao came to a realization. If they were to look at the rewards based on karma points, there was no doubt that killing the demon lord was the most. This was because very few people in the world could do such a thing. Now that Zhang Yan had such a method, he naturally would not let this place go. This was undoubtedly good for him. At least, it could relieve some of the pressure. Thus, he said happily, if you can come again, I will be more than happy to. Zhang Yan said goodbye to him and returned to the skyscraping spirit boat. Then, he checked and found that Peng Xiang's art of hiding was indeed powerful. He actually managed to escape. However, this had something to do with Guan Longzhao focusing all his attention on him. After thinking for a while, he sent an order to Peng Xiang in his mind, telling him to hide first and wait for further orders. He came down and asked Chu Su and Renji a few questions. Then, he drove the spirit boat through the array door and returned to the Golden Hall of Imperial Edict. He looked outside and saw that the conveyances and chariots were shuttling back and forth. Looking into the distance, he saw countless stardust and broken rainbows. It was even noisier than the last time he came. This situation was probably not just about the Battle of Wujua Heaven. Something big must have happened in the days he was in the Yin God Spirit Cave. He came down from the spirit boat and stepped into the Hall of Return. Taoisto was already waiting there. He smiled and cupped his hands, saying, Lord Zhang Yan, Taoist me has been waiting for you here for a long time. Zhang Yan suddenly sensed something and looked to the side. He saw a handsome cultivator standing there and said, Taoist me, is there anything I can help you with? Mi Zishu bowed to him stiffly and said, Fellow Taoist Zhang, we've agreed before that if we conquer that boundary, we'll each take half of the great medicine. He took out a stone jar from his sleeve and pushed it forward, causing it to float through the air. Zhang Yan accepted it but was not in a hurry to leave. If Mi Zishu had only come for this matter, he could have handed it to his clone. Now that Mi Zishu had personally delivered it and did not act tactfully, it meant that there might be something else. As expected, Mi Zishu really did not understand the ways of the world. Firstly, he did not invite him to another place to discuss, and secondly, he did not try to worm his way into friendship. He just said directly, I have received several edicts, all to annihilate the demonic sects, but I can't find a suitable person to join forces with. Is Taoist Zhang willing to help? Zhang Yan pondered for a while. He also sensed that something seemed to have happened in the Yuhuan heavens. Currently, his priority was to cultivate and would not get involved. It would be fine if he sent his clone. He said, I still have important matters to attend to. If Taoist Zhang thinks it's possible, I will still send my clone to help. Mi Zishu had previously joined forces with Zhang Yan's clone to fight against the enemy. He knew that the latter was extremely powerful even if it was just a clone, so he said decisively, it's settled then. Staying here to set a date, he didn't say anything more. He just turned around and left just like that, giving people a feeling that it was very rude. Priest Do chuckled and said, Zhenren Mi is a little too down-to-earth. Zhang Yan smiled slightly, not taking it to heart. Speaking of which, it was easier to deal with such people. Moreover, the other party was a demonic cultivator, so there was no need to be too calculative. Priest Do lifted his sleeve and took out a jade box, saying, Great Shen, this is the compensation promised by the palace to you. Please keep it well. With a wave of his sleeves, Zhang Yan kept it. Priest Do said, Great Shen, do you intend to personally go to the treasure feast now that you've returned? The treasure feast was a grand gathering of all realms, and would not end in a short time. It would last for at least a few decades. At this moment, there were still many cultivators rushing there. Zhang Yan smiled and did not answer. It was enough for him to send his clone there. Cultivation was the top priority at the moment, and everything else had to wait. Seeing him like this, Priest Do tactfully did not mention it. He cupped his hands and took his leave. Zhang Yan first went to the return hall to return the imperial edict and exchanged all his karma points for great medicines, which he carefully counted. In addition to the great medicines sent by Mi Zishu and Green Jade Palace, he had quite a lot of them. Even with his current cultivation method, it would be enough for him to use for another 70 to 80 years. With that, he could try to slay his future self once these external medicines were used up. After thinking about it, he activated the Emerald Cloud Talisman and entered the Righteousness Hall. He saw that the demon purging and punishing order had turned into a golden dragon and was circling there. Although his previous purging of demons was fruitful, the demons were endless and could not be quelled by him alone. With a wave of his hand, he took it down again. He was not in a hurry to leave. Instead, he went to the glazed jade wall to check on the recent events of the heavens. At a glance, the only major event was the battle for the Lord of Wujua Heaven. This realm was still in a state of endless fighting. All heavens interfered, and no one knew when there would be peace. However, there was a seemingly insignificant matter that caught his attention. A cultivator carrying an imperial edict had been killed by a Yao cultivator. This time, Green Jade Palace did not just sit back and watch. Instead, they immediately sent a cultivator to hunt down the Yao cultivator and kill him outside the Green Jade Palace. Zhang Yan smiled playfully. From the way this happened, anyone with a discerning eye could see that someone was behind this. Green Jade Palace should also know about this, but there was no further information. Combined with the previous incident, there seemed to be a turbulent tide brewing in the Yuhuan heavens, and it vaguely involved the lords of the heavenly realms. The Green Jade Palace seemed to be unable to deal with it. If this continued, it was hard to say when an unforeseen event would occur. Chapter 1551. Zhang Yan didn't have the mood to interfere in the battle of the Yuhuan heavens. After looking at the things in front of him, he walked out of the hall. Taoist Do was waiting outside. When he saw him come out, he took out a talisman book with both hands and passed it over, saying, Zhang Shangzhen, just now, there is a letter from the palace. It is for Shangzhen. Zhang Yan took it and took a look. He saw that it was from Elder Peng, inviting him to the cave abode to have a seat. He was originally prepared to pay a visit after he succeeded in his cultivation. However, since he sent a letter, he could not give him face. Moreover, this time he wasn't in the cloud continent, so he could avoid a lot of trouble. He kept the letter and said, "Thank you, Taoist Do." Taoist Do smiled. "Shangjin, you don't have to be so polite. These things are within I's responsibility." Zhang Yan returned to the Dharma boat and activated it slightly. Then he soared into the sky like a streak of black light. Following the guidance of the talisman book, half a day later, he arrived in front of a huge mountain floating in the sky. There was a river flowing around the mountain, and a waterfall fell from the sky, splashing countless silver pearls. The layout of this place was different. The entrance to the cave abode was on the top of the mountain, and there was a pavilion on top, looking like a well. Elder Peng was standing in front of the pavilion, waiting. When he saw the spell boat come over, he smiled and bowed from afar, saying loudly, "Taoist Zhang, please come over." Zhang Yan got off the spell boat and bowed, saying, "Greetings, Elder Peng." Elder Peng laughed and said, "Fellow Taoist, you don't have to be so courteous when you come to my place." He turned around and gestured for him to enter. "Come, let's talk inside." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and followed him into the cave. With the help of a torrent of water, they descended into a cave. This place was covered with fluorescent stones, and there were glass lamps hanging along the way. It was clean and clear, wiping away the dust in one's heart. Peng Zhanglao invited him to sit beside a pond. Not long after, they heard the sound of something moving. They saw a spirit turtle emerge from the water. On its back were 2 lotus jade cups. A dense icy mist seeped out from the pores on the cups' lids. Under the illumination of the lantern, it glowed with streams of light and vibrant colors. Elder Peng flicked his finger and opened the lid of the cup. He saw that it was filled to the brim with amber dew. Before it was opened, it was obviously cold, but now it was warm. Not long after, an exuberant life force filled the cave. He reached out and picked up one, smiling. "Zhang Shangjin, this wine is called Sun Moon Clear Wave. It is a secret recipe of my true Yang Palace. It was used to treat Sun Yu. Although it is not as good as the original, it has been brewed for 5,000 years, and there are dozens of cups. I can use to treat for you, so please." As he spoke, he saluted from afar. Zhang Yan shook his sleeves and picked up a cup. He saluted and drank it in one gulp. As soon as the wine entered his stomach, a warm current rippled through his body. His primordial qi and qi slowly filled up. This was completely different from the longevity Ganoderma tea that he drank previously. It seemed that it was not an exaggeration to say that it was a secret recipe of Green Jade Palace. He praised, "It is indeed a good wine." Elder Peng saw that he was fine and could not help but be shocked. This wine had the effect of strengthening one's primordial qi. The stronger the foundation, the more benefits. However, because the medicinal effect was too strong, it was no different from a fierce poison to those who did not have enough mana. Even if it was him, he would need to use his sect's method to refine it after drinking it. However, Zhang Yan did not have such a method. He completely relied on his Dharmakaya to contain the medicinal effect. He did not even need to regulate his breath. It was enough to show that his primordial qi was abundant. Elder Peng invited Zhang Yan here today. Firstly, it was to express his gratitude. Secondly, he had a certain purpose. Now that he saw Zhang Yan, he was even more determined. Putting down the wine cup in his hand, he raised his head and said, "Fellow Taoist, you have been in the Yuhuan heavens for some time. Do you have any opinion on the current situation?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I am not from the Yuhuan heavens. I know very little about this." "Elder Peng, I'm afraid you have asked the wrong person." Elder Peng shook his head and said meaningfully, "Fellow Taoist, you are wrong. From the moment you arrived here, you have already stepped into the mud. Moreover, there are some things that cannot be avoided no matter where you go." Seeing that Zhang Yan's expression was calm and unmoved, he said, "Speaking of which, I only learned of your background after we parted. According to what I know, you are here to find the divine item passed down by the great underworld patriarch. Although the Xianhong heavens is not the top in the Yuhuan heavens, if you are alone, I'm afraid it will be difficult for you to achieve your goal in a short period of time." Zhang Yan smiled. Since Elder Peng has said that, does that mean you are willing to lend a hand? Elder Peng looked at him and said, why not? It is better for fellow Taoist Zhang to obtain the divine item than for it to fall into the hands of the Luo Mountain Monastery. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered. Although he had helped Elder Peng once, he did not think that the latter would be grateful to him. It seemed that there was another reason for him to invite him here. Now, it seemed that the other party had taken a fancy to his identity as the person fated with the divine item and wanted to make use of it. On the surface, Elder Peng's plan did not seem to conflict with his. His current plan was to go to the Xianhong heavens after he had cultivated enough mana to fight against the Heavenly Lord. Then, he would propose to worship the Patriarch and claim the inheritance to gain a righteous status. If Luo Mountain Monastery gave in, he could let it go. If they were unwilling, he would fight and demand the item back. However, once the Mount Luo Monastery skin was exposed, there would be no way out. Although he was not afraid to fight them alone, in reality, if he could rope in enough people from the Green Jade Palace to help him, he might be able to force them to submit even if he did not have to fight them. However, he had to consider whether this was Green Jade Palace's intention or Elder Peng's own. There was a big difference between the two. If he was not careful, he could easily backfire. Elder Peng said, I know that after the previous incident, fellow Taoist seems to have some misunderstandings about Green Jade Palace. I won't deny that there are indeed some differences in the palace, but it will be resolved soon. He raised his wine cup and toasted again. There's still a long time, fellow Taoist, you don't have to rush to make a decision. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. He also raised his cup and drank it. After that, the two of them did not talk about the matter anymore. They only talked about Tao and people from all sides. As an elder of the Green Jade Palace, Elder Peng's knowledge and experience were much broader than the cultivators he had come into contact with before. Moreover, he had some understanding of the Sky Lords of the various worlds, and he had even evaluated the unique characteristics of their cultivation techniques. This was not something an ordinary person could know. In the past, Zhang Yan could only rely on his own speculation about the situation in the heavens. However, after listening to Elder Peng's words, it was as if a layer of fog had been wiped away. His vision became much clearer. He felt that this trip was not in vain and he had gained a lot. After talking for half a day, the sun, moon, and clear waves were finally finished. Elder Peng gave an order and a child came over with a jade plate. He said, this is what we agreed on last time. Fellow Taoist, you can take it with you. Zhang Yan took a look and knew that it was the Longevity Ganoderma tea and Bright Rouge ointment. Elder Peng was obviously a man of his word. Apart from these two items, there were also 2 golden pages with planting and cultivation methods. He nodded slightly and opened his sleeve to keep the items. Then he stood up and bowed. I have troubled you for a long time. I shall take my leave now. Elder Peng also stood up and said, let me see you off. The two of them walked out of the cave abode and arrived at the pavilion. Zhang Yan stopped and said, Elder Peng, please stay. Elder Peng laughed out loud and said, then I shall say goodbye to you here. Before I leave, I will give you one last thing. Green Jade Palace is still Green Jade Palace. No matter how big the waves are, they won't be able to overturn the heavens. I hope that you won't make a mistake when the time comes. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. He understood the meaning behind it. In order to deal with the actions of some heavenly lords, Green Jade Palace or Elder Peng might make a move. This was why he was reminding him not to stand beside those people. However, even without these words, he wouldn't get involved. He bowed and waved his sleeves. He stepped into a streak of light and instantly returned to the spell boat. Elder Peng stood on the peak and looked at the sky-scraping spell boat leave. He thought for a long time before returning to the cave abode. At this moment, someone came over. It was the deacon Taoist that Zhang Yan had met in the Cloud Continent. This person said, Elder seems to have high hopes for Zhang Shangzhen. Elder Peng said like it was a matter of course, not to mention his cultivation techniques and abilities, just his background alone is enough for me to befriend him. To him, since the great underworld ancestor let Zhang Yan come here, then he should have made some arrangements. Moreover, although Zhang Yan was alone, Who knew what kind of power the sect behind him was? He could only befriend such a person and not offend him. Just like when Sun Yu came here, he was a guest of Green Jade Palace. It was the same logic. The deacon Taoist said, "Elder, do you think that Zhang Shangzhen can successfully get the god item?" Elder Peng Daoren said, "There are many variables in this matter. It is hard for me to predict whether or not he can get it. However, I know that he isn't a disciple of the great underworld ancestor. If he reaches out to take it, he is just asking to die." The deacon Taoist sighed. Elder is right. However, many people in the world are blinded by greed. Not only outsiders, but even some people from the same sect are the same. Elder Peng turned his head and said, "What do you mean?" The deacon Taoist bowed and said, "I just came from the palace now and heard something. It is said that the elders are discussing something. They said that there have been frequent movements in the heavens recently. Although it is still tolerable, it needs to be suppressed." Elder Peng said disdainfully, "Isn't this the result of their actions? What are they going to do?" The deacon Taoist said, "I heard that they are going to release Tang Shangzhen and let her suppress them." Elder Peng frowned and said, "Senior Sister Tang?" Then, his expression changed slightly and he said in a low voice, "I remember that her son with Ju Yu was killed by fellow Taoist Zhang?" The deacon Taoist said, "Yes." Elder Peng's thoughts changed and he immediately understood the intentions behind this. He sneered repeatedly and said, "So this is what they've been plotting behind the scenes. However, some people even plot against their own sect. They really don't even care about their face." He thought for a moment and instructed, "Tell Guan Longzhao to think of a way to inform fellow Taoist Zhang. Remind him to be careful and take precautions." The deacon Taoist bowed and said, "I will arrange it." Chapter 1552. Within a cave in the Cloud Continent, a female Taoist sat cross-legged on a stone platform. On her face, she didn't have the calmness of a cultivator. Instead, she had a cold and sinister expression. The entire cave was filled with a dirty and evil energy. There was a piercing sound from outside as two streaks of light descended from the sky and landed at the foot of the mountain. Two people appeared. It was Taoist Lan and Taoist Meng from Green Jade Palace. The two of them walked in front of the cave and Taoist Lan stepped forward. "Jinren Tang, how have you been?" The female Taoist opened her eyes and looked over coldly. "What are the two of you doing here? Did you specially come to see my pitiful appearance?" Taoist Meng sighed. "Jinren probably misunderstood. We specially came to see you." The female Taoist showed a mocking expression. "The two of you came to see me? When teacher locked me up, you didn't dare to say a word." Taoist Lan admitted, "That's right, we were restricted by the palace rules and didn't say anything good for you. However, we didn't hit you when you were down, right?" The female Taoist frowned. "What do you want to do?" Taoist Meng coughed and said, "The elders discussed and felt that Jinren Tang has been locked up for so many years. Even if he has sins, he should be redeemed. We can remove the shackles and let him out." The female Taoist was startled and asked suspiciously, "Let me out? What about my senior brother? Why would he agree?" Taoist Lan said, "Elder Dong has been in secluded meditation recently. He has already handed over the right to guard it to the sect. If the elders want to let him out, then they will definitely let him out." "Senior brother is in secluded meditation?" The female Taoist was a little confused. However, as long as she could get out, she was lazy to think too much about it. She asked, "What about Peng Xinhu? Even if senior brother isn't here, will he stop us?" Taoist Meng sighed and said, "Jinren Tang is imprisoned here, so he doesn't know that Elder Peng entered the Yin God Spirit Cave to eliminate the devils 1,000 years ago. However, he was poisoned and turned into a half-human half-devil. Therefore, he can only live in the underground palace and hasn't come out for a long time." Lan Taoist added, "Even if he were to come out now, the elders would not be at ease to let him handle the affairs of the sect." "You're really letting me out?" The female Taoist was delighted. She stood up from her seat, but when she looked at the two of them, she coldly laughed and said, "Speak, what are your conditions?" Taoist Lan knew that he could not hide it from her, so he said, Then let's be frank with Zhenren Tang. There are some people who have disobeyed the rules of the Green Jade Palace and even dared to kill those who hold the imperial edict. If we don't teach them a lesson, how will the Green Jade Palace maintain its prestige? We'll have to ask Spiritual Master Tang to take action and enforce discipline. Zhenren Meng also said, I wanted to treat people with leniency, but there are always some people who obstruct the general trend and resist. These people must be killed. The female Taoist waved her hand and said impatiently, I don't care about what you say. Just tell me who you want to deal with. Lan Taoist said, let's not pursue the past. After you leave, if there are people who offend you again, we will send a letter to you. The female Taoist sneered. How could she not know that they were using her as a knife? However, as long as she could leave, she did not care. She stared at the two of them and said, then where I go, are you going to care? Lan Taoist said, as long as you leave, you are free. You can do whatever you want and go wherever you want. The palace will not control you as long as you don't delay the arrangements of the palace. The female Taoist suddenly laughed and her eyes became sharp. She screamed, freedom? What are you waiting for? Let me out now. Lan Taoist said, don't be hasty, Zhenren. Before this, please sign this contract. He stretched out his hand and a contract floated down into the cave. The female Taoist did not hesitate at all. She took it and glanced at it. She touched it with her finger and planted a strand of qi of primordial qi in it. She then threw it out and said coldly, is this enough? Lan Taoist took the contract and took out a talisman. He threw it down and said, Zhenren Tang, please take it. The female Taoist hurriedly stepped forward and grabbed it in her hand. With a slight movement, rays of spiritual light shone on her body and wrapped around her body. She took a deep breath and stepped out of the cave. This time, there was no barrier to stop her, and she smoothly exited the cave. She seemed to be impatient. As soon as she got out, she did not pay any attention to the two of them. She tiptoed and turned into a black light, flying away. Meng Taoist said, Senior brother, where do you think she is going? Lan Taoist thought for a while and said, her son was killed. Hatred has been accumulating in her heart for a long time. This time, she is definitely going to find Zhang Yan and get her revenge. Meng Taoist said, that is possible. But I heard that Zhang Yan is going to the Yin Spirit Cave. If she wants revenge, I am afraid she will have to wait a while. Lan Taoist said, isn't that what we want? Those who do not follow the rules are the ones we need to deal with. Once she teaches them a lesson, we will have peace for a while. Meng Taoist said, that is right. The good deeds system cannot be broken. But we cannot be too forceful. Peng Xinhu and the others only know how to be tough. They do not know that if they do this, it will cause people to fear them. How can they spread the good deeds to the heavens? Lan Taoist said coldly, they will not understand our good intentions. But recently, Elder Peng seems to be getting better. I am afraid he will come and find trouble with us. Meng Taoist said casually, just block him. It is not like 1,000 years ago. Lan Taoist said in a deep voice, I am worried that he will alert the few in the secret gate. If that happens, it will be difficult to deal with. Meng Taoist thought for a while and said, Elder Peng is suffering from the demonic poison. It is not that easy to cure it. If it is not completely cured and there are still problems left, it will not be a blessing for our Green Jade Palace. Lan Taoist immediately understood what he meant and agreed, that is right. If Elder Peng is going to come out, he must investigate carefully so that he does not harm others and himself. On the other side, Zhang Yan flew down from the clouds on the spirit boat. He was ready to go to the Yin Spirit Cave again. When he arrived at the array door, a cultivator came up. It seemed like he had been waiting there for a long time. He bowed deeply to the spirit boat and said loudly, May I ask if it is Zhang Shangzhen on the boat? I am a disciple of my Ju sect. I am here to visit Shangzhen under the orders of the sect masters. Zhang Yan glanced at him and gave an order. One of the attendants went down and said a few words to the cultivator. Then the cultivator was brought back. Behind him were two beautiful female disciples with fair skin. The cultivator came to him and did not dare to raise his head. He bowed respectfully and said, I am Qiu Zhongxian. Greetings, Shangzhen. The two female disciples followed him and bowed. Zhang Yan said, No need to be so polite. You just now say that you are from my Ju sect. I remember that there is a sect in Yihai Tian that said it was also passed down by the patriarch. So, it is called this sect. Is it you? Qiu Zhongxian was a little scared and said, Shangzhen is talking about a small sect. The founder of this sect was fortunate enough to listen to the teachings of the great underworld patriarch for a few days. That was how he established this sect. Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, You just now say that you are here under the orders of the sect masters. What is it for? Qiu Zhongxian revealed a sorrowful expression and said, To tell you the truth, a few years ago, a few cultivators from the Bayan sect came to my sect, saying that they are the orthodox sect of the Tai Ming patriarch and wanted me to submit to them. Although my sect is small and weak, we have never submitted to anyone since we were established. Who would have thought that the sect master would reject them and was severely injured by them? They even said that if we don't submit, they will raze our sect to the ground. After that, I asked around and found out that it was not only my clan, but also a few other clans of the same lineage in Yihaitian were also threatened by this Bayan sect. After a discussion, the leaders of these clans decided to seek outside help. As he said this, he cupped his hands and said, I heard that Shangzhen is the direct disciple of the patriarch. I heard that Shangzhen might be staying here, so I came here to wait. I hope Shangzhen will forgive me. Zhang Yan's thoughts changed. He had heard of the name Bayan sect before. These people had once come to threaten the Mize sect. At that time, he had sent his avatar to help, but this person had retreated without a fight. He had thought that they had ceased all activities, but who would have thought that they had run off to stir up trouble elsewhere? He thought for a while and said, Have you gone to Xianhong Heaven to ask for help? Qiu Zhongxian hesitated and said with his head lowered, I did go to Xianhong Heaven in the beginning, but the Luo Mountain Monastery didn't see me as a fellow sect, so they chased away the messengers they sent. Zhang Yan nodded and said, I understand. I still need to investigate this matter. You can stay on my boat for the time being. He would not listen to this person's side of the story. Moreover, there was something strange about this Maiju sect. Even if he really wanted to help, he had to investigate the situation first. This matter was actually not difficult. As long as he asked with a little bit of good deeds, he would probably get an answer in no time. But now, his cultivation was the most important thing. Even if he wanted to solve this matter, he would at most send Avatar. He would not go personally. Qiu Zhongxian did not dare to say more. He obediently retreated and followed a few demon servants into a cave room. When the door of the cave room was closed and there were no outsiders, the female disciple opened her eyes wide and asked, Master, will Shangzhen help us? Qiu Zhongxian sighed and said, This is hard to know. But Shangzhen did not kill us, so there is still some hope. Another female disciple said worriedly, Will Shangzhen be unhappy because we went to seek help from Xianhong Heaven first? Qiu Zhongxian smiled bitterly and said, I am also worried about this. Unfortunately, although the few sect leaders heard of Zhenren Zhang's reputation, they insisted that Xianhong Heaven is the orthodox sect, so they ordered me to seek help from them first. But they did not think that Luo Mountain Monastery has always been high and mighty. They see us as a branch sect, so why would they care about us? We are just asking for humiliation. As he spoke, he put his hand into his sleeve and held an item tightly. This item was given to him by the sect leader before he left. It was said that it was obtained from a cave residence left behind by the Tai Ming Grandmaster. But until now, no one could solve it. He originally wanted to give it to Luo Mountain Monastery in exchange for help, but it was a pity that this person did not care about him at all. If Zhang Yan was willing to agree, then he would give this item to him. Chapter 1553. After Zhang Yan sent Taoist Zhou away, he inquired about the Bayan sect in the Yin book using karma points as a reward. Only on the second day did someone accept the karma points. At the same time, some information about this sect appeared in the book. The Bayan sect did exist, but it was originally a small sect in a corner of the Leaf Sea sky. Perhaps because it rarely interacted with the outside world, neither the Luo Mountain Monastery nor the Tanbua sect had any accurate records about it, so he had no way to know about it. The sect had gradually prospered over the past 1,000 years. In the process of its rise, it had annexed all the surrounding sects, and in the past 100 years, its power had once again grown by leaps and bounds, becoming a large sect comparable to the Milky Lake sect when it was at its peak. If a sect was originally a small sect, it was possible for it to rise after obtaining a certain magic treasure or inheritance from a Taoist palace. However, the further one went, the narrower the path would be. If one wanted to become a large sect like that, they either had a deep foundation or inherited the legacy of another large sect. If it was neither of the above, then there was another possibility, and that was that there was another force behind it. If this was really the case, then there had to be a purpose behind it. It could be seen that this sect cared about the name of the great underworld patriarch. In the past, it would be useless to fight for this title, but the situation was different now. There was still 1,000 years to go, and if no one could obtain the Xian stone, it would become an object without a master. However, everything was justified, and there was no doubt that the descendants of the great underworld patriarch were more qualified to obtain it. Since they had appeared at this time, it was very likely that they had come for this divine object. If this was really the case, then to ensure that their plan would go smoothly, would they come to attack him? This was not impossible, and to be able to support a remote sect into a large sect in such a short period of time, this force was clearly extremely powerful. After carefully considering the pros and cons, Zhang Yan finally decided to intervene in this matter. It was not just to stand up for the Maiju sect, but also for his own sake. Even if the final result was different from what he had expected, there would be no loss. Thus, with a command, a servant immediately went to invite Qiu Zhongxian over. Not long after, Qiu Zhongxian was brought into the hall. In front of the stairs, he bowed and said, "This little Taoist pays his respects to Zhang Shangzhen." At this moment, he was feeling very uneasy. If he couldn't get any help here, he didn't know what to do. Perhaps the only path he could take was to submit to the cold chill sect. Zhang Yan said, "Fellow Taoist Qiu, the Bayan sect, had previously besieged fellow Taoist Mize sect's mountain gate and was later driven away by I. I didn't expect that they would come to cause trouble at fellow Taoists elsewhere. I can't ignore this matter, but Yi Heishan is guarded by the Heavenly Lord. If I want to go there, I need you to inform the Heavenly Lord of the realm first." Perhaps the Heavenly Master would not care if an ordinary cultivator entered the Page C sky, but at his level of cultivation he could single-handedly affect the direction of the world if the Heavenly Master did not appear. Therefore, when going to the Heavenly Master's territory, it was necessary to inform the Heavenly Master in advance. This was not only out of courtesy, but also for convenience. When Qiu Zhongxian heard that Zhang Yan was willing to help, he was happy at first, but then he felt a little awkward. Meishu sect was only a small sect, and the highest cultivation level in the sect was only at the Yuaning level. The other sects were also close, so where could he go to inform the high and mighty Heavenly Master? He hesitated for a while and said, "Shangzhen, I am really ashamed. My small sect is weak and humble, so I can't inform the Heavenly Master of Shangzhen's arrival." Zhang Yan smiled, waved his sleeve, and a talisman fell down. He said, "When you return, just bring this talisman book to the realm." Qiu Zhongxian came to a realization and said, "So Shangzhen already has a plan, I am ashamed." He hesitated for a while, and took out a tortoise shell from his sleeve. He raised his hands and raised it above his head and said, "Shangzhen, this is a treasure of my sect. Rumor has it that it was obtained from a cave abode of the great underworld master. Before leaving, the sect master said that if anyone helps, this item will be given to them. Now that Shangzhen is willing to help, we, a small sect, have nothing to repay, so we can only offer this item to Shangzhen." When Zhang Yan heard that this item was left by the great underworld master, he was instantly interested. He used his mana to take it over, and after a few glances, he saw a few deep patterns carved on the shell, and it seemed to contain some kind of abstruse wisdom. However, he could not understand it at the moment, so he kept it and said, "Fellow Taoist Qiu, you can return to the realm first. After you send the letter, I will make arrangements." Qiu Zhongxian clasped his hands in gratitude and left. When he reached the cave room, he said to the two disciples, "Pack up and follow me back to the sect." The two female disciples came up and said, "Teacher, is there any progress?" Qiu Zhongxian sighed. "Zhang Shangzhen is indeed the successor of the great underworld master. He is much better than Xian Hongtian and the others." The two female disciples could not believe it and asked in unison, "Zhang Shangzhen agreed?" Qiu Zhongxian nodded, "Of course." In a few words, he told them about the situation in the hall just now. When the two female disciples heard this, they both cheered happily. However, after a while, one of them became worried and said in a low voice, "Teacher gave the mystic tortoise shell to Zhang Shangzhen. Zhang Shangzhen will take it, but he won't go to the inner world." Qiu Zhongxian's expression suddenly changed and he shouted, "Be careful with your words." Seeing this, the female disciple's face turned pale, and she said with grievance, "Teacher." Qiu Zhongxian took a deep breath, and he said seriously, "You must remember not to say these things in the future. Since a great cultivator like Zhang Shangzhen has made a promise, he will not go back on it." The two female disciples nodded, and they did not dare to say anything else. Qiu Zhongxian was afraid that the disciples would say something they shouldn't, and he was in a hurry to go back to report this matter. After a while, he left the spiritual boat with the two female disciples and returned to the realm. In the hall, Zhang Yan flipped the tortoise shell in his hand. Only those who had reached a certain realm would be attracted by the patterns on it, and he was no exception. However, when he looked at it again, he found that there was a faint aura lingering on it. This aura was as deep as the void, vast and boundless. It seemed that this was where the mysteries of the tortoise shell lay. However, he had been guided by great underworld patriarch's intent, so he knew that this aura was not left behind by this patriarch. He couldn't help but think, Qiu Zhongxian doesn't dare to lie about matters involving the patriarch, so who does this aura belong to? However, with great underworld patriarch's cultivation, there must be some deep meaning for him to leave this thing in the universal heavens, so he didn't dare to underestimate it. After thinking about it, he carefully accepted it. After that, he pointed a finger at himself. A ray of light flashed, and a clone walked out. The clone was connected to his mind, so it knew what it should do. It bowed to him and then turned into a ray of light, disappearing without a trace. After doing this, he waved his sleeve, and the spiritual boat passed through the square gate in front of him. Half a month later, in a hidden realm in the universal heavens, 3 grand lights shone down. Each person's face was hard to distinguish, and only their silhouettes could be seen. The person in the east looked around, and he asked the person in the north, "Heavenly Lord Juan, Heavenly Lord Zhu didn't come?" Heavenly Lord Juan said slowly, "It's said that he has something to do, so it's difficult for him to come here." The person in the west said, "It doesn't matter if one person is missing. The Green Jade Palace is probably watching Heavenly Lord Zhu, so it's not good to move." Heavenly Lord Juan looked at the two and said, "Don't you think it's strange? The Green Jade Palace's rules have always been strict and unreasonable. Even if you're a heavenly lord of a realm, if you cross the line, you'll still be punished, sealed, or stripped of your magic power. But now that we've committed a crime, they didn't come to ask about it, which is very inconsistent with their usual behavior. I have to ask, why are they doing this?" The two at the side didn't speak immediately. They were also thinking about this matter. The Green Jade Palace had always been unyielding, but they suddenly gave in. This made people wonder whether the Green Jade Palace didn't want to investigate further, or they didn't have the strength to do so. If that was the case, they wouldn't dare to act rashly. But in the past few hundred years, there had been a rumor that the true Young Almighty was no longer in the Green Jade Palace. Before he left a message in the palace, saying, "If there's a master in all realms, it's not just the Green Jade Palace." This was clearly saying that the master of all realms didn't have to be in the Green Jade Palace. If they were capable enough, they could live there. But it was said that after the Green Jade Palace disciple heard this, he didn't say anything about it, and tried to maintain his position. Ever since the news spread, it had caused some sects to become restless. Although the heavens regarded the Qinghua heavens as the true master, it was only because of this supreme expert. If this person was not present, even if the palace was still incomparably powerful, it would be impossible for it to subdue the heavens like in the past. They used all kinds of methods to investigate the origin of this rumor, but to no avail. But this proved that the origin of this rumor was not ordinary, and it was very likely that it came from the Green Jade Palace. The person on the east corner said, "This is a serious matter, and we need to be extremely cautious. I think that the previous probing was not enough, and we need to pressure the Green Jade Palace." The person on the west corner suddenly said, "In fact, Heavenly Lord Juju is the most suitable person." The other two thought about it and nodded. Juju didn't hide his attack at all. If he did it again, and the Green Jade Palace could bear with it, although it couldn't prove the rumor, it meant that something had changed in the Green Jade Palace. This was very helpful for them to judge the situation. Heavenly Lord Jueyuan shook his head. "This is too risky." Heavenly Lord Juju dared to do it once, but he might not dare to do it again. The person on the west corner smiled and said, "Don't worry, when the time comes, someone will persuade him." The person on the east corner asked curiously, "Does Heavenly Lord Huan know something?" Huan Heavenly Lord said, "Not long ago, I received news that Spiritual Master Tang of the Green Jade Palace had run out of the palace for some unknown reason. Everyone, don't forget that her own son died at the hands of Taoist Yang. She alone might not be able to avenge this enmity. If nothing unexpected happens, she'll surely head to Zhuzhu Tian to look for help. In this way, we just have to wait here for the outcome." Chapter 1554. On the altar, the array door opened wide. As the light rotated and stretched, Zhang Yan's avatar walked out. Ever since he was separated from the real body, he had been staying in the Imperial Edict Golden Hall. Half a month ago, he received the Dragon God's letter and knew that he could enter the realm without any hindrance. Just now he was here. At this moment, it was night time. He turned around and saw that the altar he was standing on was built on top of a towering cliff. A crescent moon hung in the sky, and below it, waves roiled and rose and fell, forming a boundless ocean. This was Yihai Tian. It was surrounded by hundreds of oceans and there were very few continents. The lord of this realm was a dragon god and he usually lived in the cave abode under the sea. This was also the place where Tai Ming Patriarch stayed for the longest time. He taught Tao here several times. Therefore, in this realm, there were many sects that worshipped him as their patriarch. There was a Taoist guard on the altar. He walked forward and bowed, saying, "Is this your first time in Yihai Tian? I have a map for you." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "It's not easy for me to get a map elsewhere. Why did you take the initiative to give it to me when it's your turn?" The Taoist guard smiled and said, "You may not know this, but there are very few living creatures in Yihai Tian. It's not suitable for gathering spiritual vigor. Unlike other realms, there are very few Taoists here. However, the aquatic demons here are very thirsty for the elixirs and instruments that we use. They are very eager for Taoists to visit their cave abodes. Therefore, they asked me to give these maps to the Taoist friends and great deities who are passing by." Zhang Yan took a look and nodded. He waved his sleeves and kept the map. Although Qiu Zhongxian from my Ju sect had given him a geographical map, it was only a map of the land. It did not include the tribes under the sea. With this map, he could make up for it. He identified the direction and flew in the direction of my Ju sect. After traveling on the sea for 2 days, a continent appeared in front of him. However, the terrain was broken. It looked like a patchwork of islands of different sizes. In the south, there was a mountain that rose from the ground. It was shaped like a rhinoceros horn. There were thousands of iron rings along the ridge, and they were all floating in the air. At this moment, there were a few people using their hands and feet to climb up, as if they were trying their best to reach the top. It was just that these sceneries were fleeting and blurry, as if they were separated by a layer of flowing water. This was because these islands were all in a formation, but because his mana was too high, he could see inside and outside, observing the sceneries inside. If his cultivation level was not as high, what appeared in front of him would only be a vast expanse of seawater. Even though he was only a clone and had restrained his aura, the profound energy that covered the heavens and the earth could still be seen in the sky. When the cultivators below saw this, they were all extremely nervous, and the streaks of light moved about ceaselessly as if they were in a panic. Seeing the chaos, he stopped and transmitted his voice. "Is fellow Taoist Qiu there? I have come." Qiu Zhongxian was standing in the cave abode with more than 10 Taoists and looking outside. He had returned to the sect a month ago and told the sect masters about Zhang Yan's arrival. These days, he had been waiting for his arrival. When he heard the voice, he was overjoyed. He bowed to Daoren, who was standing in the middle, and said, "Sect master, it's Zhang Shangzhen." As soon as he said this, the tension in the cave abode was swept away, and it was replaced by excitement and joy. When Daoren heard this, he was also very excited. He said, "Has this Shangzhen arrived? No wonder he has such a great presence." He turned around and said, "I heard that this Shangzhen has come here on the orders of the great underworld patriarch. His identity is noble. Why don't you go out with I to welcome him?" The Taoists all said yes, and remembered Qiu Zhongxian's warning. They all activated their protective jade pendants to prevent themselves from being knocked down by Zhang Yan's qi. Daoren took out a talisman from his sleeve and opened a door in the formation. He then led the group out and came to the sky. He saw a handsome young Taoist with his big sleeves fluttering in the air. He quickly came forward and bowed to him. He said, "I am Fan Zhang, the sect master of my Ju sect. Greetings, Zhang Shangzhen." The Taoists behind him also bowed. Zhang Yan said, "You don't have to be so polite." Fan Zhang stood up and said respectfully, "Zhang Shangzhen has come from afar to help me. We, my Ju sect, are very grateful. We have already prepared a banquet at the mountain gate. I wonder if we can have the honor to invite Shangzhen into our abode?" Zhang Yan readily agreed. He followed Fan Zhang and the others into the cave abode. The food prepared for the banquet was obviously meticulously prepared. Although the food and wine were just decorations to him, my Ju sect's etiquette was still there. Fan Zhang also knew that these things could not be used to entertain this great cultivator. He sighed and said, "Shangzhen, it's not that we are treating you poorly. It's just that whenever my Ju sect patrols outside, they will try to kill our disciples if they see them going out. This is to threaten us." A Taoist at the banquet also sighed and said, "It's not just sect master Fan. Which sect isn't forced to defend their mountain gate? The land of Yihai is barren. The medicine that they need can only be plucked from the sea. All these years, it has delayed the cultivation of many disciples. They can't even go outside to recruit disciples. If this continues, their inheritance will be cut off." Zhang Yan said, "When I came just now, I didn't see anyone patrolling outside." Qiu Zhongxian said, "Shangzhen, this person usually travels by flying boat. He has set up many instruments outside to spy on our qi dynamic. As long as we go out 1,000 miles or try to destroy this item, he will definitely find out. Not long after, he will come to make things difficult for us." 1,000 miles was an extremely short distance in this sea. They couldn't go far. Not to mention plucking or exchanging medicine from other places. Zhang Yan sensed for a while, and sure enough, he detected a fluctuation of spiritual vigor in all directions. He scanned his surroundings, and when he saw that there were no other tricks, he flicked his finger, and a sword talisman flew out. In an instant he left the island, and made one round within 1,000 miles, and destroyed all the instruments. He said, "I have already destroyed this instrument. If he senses it, he will come out and I will ask him." Fan Zhang quickly stood up and thanked him, "I will leave everything to you, Shangzhen." After a dozen breaths, Zhang Yan suddenly felt a movement in a certain boundary. It was the door of a small world opening. He nodded slightly. As he expected, this person usually hid in the small world. He would only come out when the prohibition or instrument was disturbed. At this moment, the person who came out was a burly cultivator with a rough appearance. He was holding a magic plate in his hand. After fiddling with it for a while, he looked around suspiciously. After hesitating for a while, he turned around and went back into the small world. It was obvious that he felt something was wrong and didn't dare to check outside like he usually did. Zhang Yan smiled. This person was a cautious person. However, since the location of the small world was exposed in front of him, there was no difference between hiding and hiding. With a little deduction, he knew the location of the small world. He reached out and instantly broke through the space between the worlds. He dragged the cultivator out and threw him down the stairs. Fan Zhang frowned and looked around. Everyone shook their heads. It was obvious that they had never seen this person before. The cultivator was dizzy from the fall. When he saw his surroundings clearly, he couldn't help but be shocked. However, he knew that the person who could bring him out from the small world must have some extraordinary means. He only sat up but didn't dare to get up. Zhang Yan looked down and asked, "Who are you? Are you a disciple of the Bayan sect?" Only then did the cultivator look in Zhang Yan's direction. With just one glance, he felt dizzy and almost fell down again. Knowing that he had encountered a powerful person, he immediately became docile and said, "I am Yuan, not a cultivator of the Bayan sect. A month ago, there was a cultivator of this sect here. He said he had something to do and had to leave for a while. In exchange, he gave me a bottle of medicinal pills and asked me to stand guard here and monitor the movements of a sect here." Zhang Yan thought about it. A month ago, he left precisely because he was waiting. During this period of time, it was very likely that this person already knew that he was coming, so he left early and made such arrangements. However, this was also within his consideration. When Qiu Zhongxian came to find him, this matter couldn't be hidden. After asking a few more questions, he saw that this person's knowledge was limited, so he had people take him away and temporarily keep him in custody. Then he looked up and said, "Sect Master Fan, I want to ask you about something." Fan Zhang hurriedly stood up and said, "You flatter me, you flatter me. If you really have any questions, I will tell you everything I know." Zhang Yan raised his sleeve and took out the tortoise shell, placing it on the table. He said, "When Master Qiu handed this to me, he said that this was passed down in your sect. May I know where you found this back then?" Fan Zhang looked and said, "So you really want to ask about this? This tortoise shell was obtained by the founder of my sect from one of the cave residences of the great underworld patriarch. That place still exists, but there is something special about it. Just now, it has appeared 60 years ago. It hasn't been that long since the time has passed. If you really want to enter, you might have to wait for another few decades." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "That's fine. I will wait here for a while." Fan Zhang was overjoyed when he heard that. Although Zhang Yan had scared that person away, the matter had not been resolved yet. He was extremely afraid that after Zhang Yan left, the Bayan sect would return, and it would be troublesome if that happened. Someone on the table was in disbelief and asked carefully, "Is Supreme Patriarch really willing to stay here? Will it delay Supreme Patriarch's matter?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This time, I only came with a clone, so I have nothing to worry about. I still have a few cultivation methods here. Since everyone's cultivation methods are also passed down by the great underworld patriarch, we can take this opportunity to study them together." Everyone was instantly excited when they heard that. Why would a great cultivator like Zhang Yan need to study cultivation methods with them? He was clearly using this as an excuse to guide them. Fan Zhang bowed solemnly and said, "I thank Supreme Patriarch for granting my wish." Everyone on the table also stood up and bowed in unison. Zhang Yan smiled slightly. He could protect this junior for a while, but not for a long time. Instead of that, it was better to find a way to help them improve the strength of their sect. No matter what, they still respected the great underworld patriarch in name and were considered family. If any sect could really become strong in the future, he did not mind giving them a talisman or a golden disc and accepting them as a lower sect of the Qinsong. Chapter 1555. Zhang Yan's avatar stayed in Yihaitian for a long time, and more than 10 years passed in the blink of an eye. During this period of time, whenever he was free, he would give pointers to the various sects' divine arts, and he would deduce and improve the cultivation methods of the sections. This was equivalent to pointing out the path of cultivation for the cultivators of these sections. In the future, as long as there were enough external medicines, the disciples of these sects would have the opportunity to enter the grotto heaven realm. However, this was only a possibility. In order to enter this realm, aptitude, luck, temperament, skill, and even the guidance of a master were all indispensable. Although these sects had existed for a long time, no one had reached the highest realm. At the very least, it would take more than 1,000 years of accumulation before there would be a chance of success. However, after staying here for so long, he found that the reason these sects couldn't grow wasn't just because they lacked cultivation methods, but also because of the scarcity of external herbs. It was extremely difficult for Yi Haitian to collect foreign medicines. Most of the rare treasures were occupied by the tribes in the sea, and some were distributed in the vast sea. Because the sea was full of ferocious monsters and demonic fishes, even if he found them, he might not be able to bring them back smoothly from those places. He pondered for a bit. If he didn't change this predicament, then the chance of these sects rising was very small. He called a boy and ordered him to invite Qiu Zhongxian. After Qiu Zhongxian arrived, he respectfully asked, "Does Supreme True have any orders?" Before, he feared Zhang Yan more than he respected him, but now he respected Zhang Yan from the bottom of his heart. After receiving guidance from Zhang Yan, his cultivation, which had been stagnant for a long time, had taken another step forward. Not only him, but many of the cultivators in the sect had also benefited a lot. It could be said that the strength of the entire sect had increased greatly, and this made him very grateful. Zhang Yan said, "I've been thinking about it recently. Your school lacks both foreign and domestic medicine. Even if you have a method, most of your disciples can only rely on breathing exercises to regulate their breathing. This way of cultivation progress is very slow. In the end, it will be difficult for your school to prosper." Qiu Zhongxian let out a sigh and wryly smiled. How could disciple not know what Supreme Truth said? However, the Lord of Page Sea Sky is the dragon god, and he cares for the water clan. Although he has no ill will toward us human cultivators, he has no intention of looking out for us. Most of the treasures in the inner realm are in the hands of the water clan, and we have no hope of getting them or competing with them. Zhang Yan pondered for a moment. The easiest way to improve the situation was to spread the karma system here. Then, no matter what they wanted, they only needed to earn karma points. However, if they did so, they would definitely come into conflict with the Lord of this world, so it was not advisable. However, there was another way that was much simpler. He said, "Go and pick some disciples. Not only your Juju sect, but all the other sects should also have a few. They don't have to be talented, as long as they are quick-witted and intelligent." Qiu Zhongxian didn't know what he wanted to do, but he didn't dare to ask. He cupped his hands and said, "This disciple will arrange it right away." He had only cultivated for 700 years, and he had received guidance from Zhang Yan, so it wasn't an exaggeration to call him a disciple. After he returned, he immediately began to pick disciples. In just a few days, more than 130 youths were sent to the sect. Inside the spacious cave, young men and women stood together. They were all excited and nervous. Although Zhang Yan had said that their aptitudes did not need to be too good, the people under him did not understand the real purpose behind it, so they did not dare to be negligent. The disciples sent over were all outstanding juniors of their respective clans, and many of them were even familiar with each other. Among the crowd, there was a quick-witted young man who looked left and right. He nudged his companion with his elbow and asked in a low voice, "Young brother Ing, do you know why Shangzhen sent us here?" The young man named Ing was a bit nervous and said, "How would I know? Does young brother Min know?" The young man named Min blinked and whispered, "If you ask me, is Supreme Truth really going to choose someone he likes to take in as a disciple?" The young man named Ying's eyes lit up, and his breathing quickened. This Zhang Shangzhen was an almighty who could travel through the void and wasn't bound by heaven and earth. Even in Yi Haitian, there were less than a handful of people like him. If they could take him as a disciple, they might be able to achieve Dao fruit and become a great cultivator in the future. At this moment, they weren't the only ones who had this thought. Which of the youths here didn't have this hope? Many of their young faces showed a look of yearning. At this moment, a cold voice sounded, You fools want to be Zhang Shangzhen's disciple? What a joke! These words angered the crowd. Everyone looked over angrily and saw that the speaker was a black-clothed youth. He didn't look outstanding, but he had a unique arrogance about him. The young man named Min muttered, "So it's that wild kid, Zheng Feng. Ignore him." The young man named Ying suddenly understood. He hadn't seen the owner of this name before, but he was quite famous. 3 years ago, he was just a child collecting shells by the sea. One day, he suddenly saw a large turtle breathing on a rock, making a rumbling sound. He imitated it, but with his outstanding comprehension and tenacious temperament, he managed to cultivate a small amount of inner qi. After this matter spread, an elder of the sect heard about it and personally took him in as a disciple. Zheng Feng didn't disappoint. 3 years later, he opened his meridians and broke through seclusion. Since then, his cultivation had improved extremely quickly. Now he was about to enter the second tier of clear qi. Many of the youths present curled their lips. Perhaps his temperament had been honed by fighting for shells and jade by the sea. Every time Zheng Feng fought, he would fight to the death without retreating. He had quite a bit of craziness. It could be said that his reputation spread far and wide. No one was willing to provoke such a person. Zhang Yan was sitting in the cave at this moment. An attendant came up and said, "Shangzhen, the disciples that you ordered to search for have arrived. There are a total of 136 of them. They are all waiting for you." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Do as I said." The servant bowed and retreated from the cave, all the way to the cave hall where the young men and women were. He was expressionless. He grabbed a handful of shell beads and released them, letting them fall to the ground. He said, "All disciples, listen up. I give you all the time it takes to burn a stick of incense. Find the most special shell bead." When he finished, he took out 3 long incense sticks and inserted them into the incense burner in front of the table. Without saying anything more, he turned around and went to the back screen. Only the 100 or so youths were left. Some of the smarter ones immediately rushed forward. Instantly, many followed and started searching inside. Why were the nanbei beads of the same size? Even if there was a slight difference, it might not be the most special one. However, there were many people who stood on the spot and did not move. They were very clear that this was a test. How could it be so easy to find the special shell bead? There must be some secret inside. Before they figured it out, they would not act rashly. Zheng Feng also began to ponder. Not long after, he walked forward and picked up a shell pearl in front of many people's eyes. Then he channeled his mana and the shape of the pearl slowly changed, as if a layer was shaved off. Quite a number of people slapped their heads, as if they had been enlightened. They could not find out what the special shell bead was, but they could use their mana to polish it and make it the most unique one. There were also some youngsters who looked dejected. It was not easy to use mana to carve it, and only a third of the people present could attempt it. Zheng Feng looked at many people who were imitating him and laughed coldly. If it was only one person doing this, it would be fine. However, if many people were to imitate him, how would it show the uniqueness of the shell bead? The time it took to burn a stick of incense passed quickly. When the incense burned out, the servant turned around again. He stretched out his hand and all the shell beads flew out from their bodies and into his hand. Then he went to the back hall and said, "Shangzhen, I have brought the shell beads." As he spoke, he shook his sleeve and all the shell beads floated out and floated in midair. Zhang Yan looked over. Just now, the test actually did not have a definite answer. It only used this method to observe each person's temperament and talent. Among them, there were about 20 that he liked. So, he called out these people's names and said, "Go and bring them here." After a while, more than 20 youths came to the back hall with excited hearts. Zheng Feng was among them. Although he looked normal, his fingers were slightly trembling, showing that he was not calm in the depths of his heart. After the youths bowed, Zhang Yan said, "From tomorrow onwards, you will follow me to learn alchemy." When the youths heard this, their expressions were both excited and disappointed. However, they originally only thought about becoming Zhang Yan's disciple and did not expect too much. Moreover, Yi Haitian's alchemist status was extremely high. If they learned well, they could go anywhere in the world. It was easy for them to become a distinguished guest of various tribes and bring great benefits to the sect. Some alchemist grandmasters could even become guests of the Dragon House. Zhang Yan said a few words and ordered the attendants to dismiss the youths. At most, he would only need a few decades to teach these disciples some basic alchemy methods. At that time, there would naturally be many tribes in the sea who would come looking for them. The sects would no longer be burdened by external medicine and would have the opportunity to rise and become stronger. This way, his arrangements here would not be in vain. In the following days, apart from teaching alchemy, he patiently waited for the cave to open. Soon, several years passed. On this day, when he was examining the tortoise shell in his hand, he suddenly felt something. He floated out of the cave and came to the side of a river on the land. After a while, he saw a group of waves, and then a golden-scaled carp jumped out, holding a letter in its mouth. Although it was a demonic fish, its aura was extremely pure and there was no demonic aura. There was no doubt that it had obtained the inheritance of the supreme technique. Obviously, its background was not small. And in Yi Haitian, there was probably only one person who could train an ordinary water creature into such a state. Zhang Yan took the letter, opened it, and couldn't help but narrow his eyes. He thought for a moment, then closed the letter and said, "When you go back, you can tell your master that thank him for sending a letter to inform me of this. I will come to thank him in the future." The demonic fish bowed to him and plunged into the water. With a shake of its tail, it disappeared with the current. Chapter 1556. There was a three-legged cauldron in the cavern. At this moment, white gas was seeping out of the smoke holes. The gas looked rather heavy, flowing on the ground like water, and wisps of it lingered outside. After a while, a tinkling sound rang out from inside. It sounded like the plucking of zither strings, but also like a clear spring in a valley, refreshing and soothing the ears. Jing Feng's expression was extremely solemn. He slowly stood up, and when the time was right, he released his Fa Li. With a muffled sound, a pillar of gas surged out of the cauldron and pushed the cauldron's lid to a height of 10 feet. There were over 10 pills floating inside, and they were surrounded by colorful lights. It was extremely dazzling. He reached out to grab them and took a look. Even with his temperament, he could not help but reveal an excited expression at this moment. When Zhang Yan was teaching the pill refinement method, he had said that he would only give one pill recipe at a time. Every time a disciple completely mastered the pill, just now, he would continue to teach the next one. This meant that if one did not have enough comprehension or patience, then one would not be able to go far on the pill refinement method. However, if one had both, then one step at a time, they might be able to achieve great things. Zheng Feng's talent was extremely high, and he had already mastered 5 pill recipes. If this cauldron was completed, he would be able to master the 6th. It had been over 40 years since he started learning the pill refinement method, and he would obtain one every 7 to 8 years. Among his peers, other than a girl called Cui Ming who could compare to him, there were only 3 who had mastered the most pill recipes. He carefully put these pills into a jade box that he had prepared beforehand. With a wave of his sleeve, he opened the door to the pill refinement room and sent out all the smoke. He then closed the lid of the cauldron and sorted out the various herbs, returning them to their positions one by one. Now, he only needed to give an order, and there would be servants who would come and take care of these things. However, he did not need outsiders to interfere. From start to finish, everything was done by himself. Among the 20 or so people who had stayed back then, he was the only one who did not have a servant by his side. Because he came from a different background and acted independently, yet his natural talent just happened to far surpass many of his peers, everyone excluded him. However, he didn't care because he knew that even if his clan joined in, these people might not take him to be one of their own. So, it was better to not disturb each other. After tidying up, he stepped out of the cave and stepped on a streak of light, heading toward a cliff that hung from the sky. After a short while, he landed on a golden chain bridge. Ancient trees were lush in front of him, and the eaves of the pavilions were faintly discernible. When he reached the end of the ropeway, he arrived at the bottom of the stairs of a golden palace. This was the alchemy hall that the various sects had built for Zhang Yan. It was also the place where he passed on his teachings. Any disciple that had questions about the Tao of alchemy could come here to ask for guidance. When Jing Fengkai arrived at the door, he saw two cultivators, one male and one female, walk out. The man was tall, and he walked with his head held high. The woman had exquisite facial features, and her lips were red. She wore a light blue dress, and her waist was slender. She looked soft and weak. When the male cultivator saw Zheng Feng, he was startled at first, but he quickly realized what Zheng Feng was here for. He laughed and said, "Junior brother Zheng, you haven't appeared for half a year. Did you come here today because you successfully refined the 5th pill recipe? I must congratulate you." Speaking to this point, he sighed slightly and said in a slightly joking tone, "It's a pity that junior brother is still a step too late. Senior Cui has already refined the 5th type of pill before the new year. Even Shangzhen has praised her and bestowed her with the 6th pill recipe." Jing Feng was a little surprised. He didn't think that Cui Ming would be one step ahead of him. However, it wasn't that strange. The herbs he used for alchemy were all personally picked out by his own family, and the others were all juniors of the elders of the various sections. These people had hired alchemists to help them identify the medicinal properties of the herbs. As a result, the number of times they refined pills and the time they spent refining them correspondingly increased. Cui Ming's talent was originally not much worse than his, so it was natural for her to be able to do this. He nodded at Cui Ming as a form of congratulation and was about to go inside. However, the male cultivator wasn't willing to let him go so easily. He said proudly, "Junior martial brother Zheng, Shangzhen gave senior martial sister Cui the pill recipe. It's an earth pill recipe." At that time, senior martial sister Cui only needed an hour to understand it. Now that she's successfully refined it, she showed it to Shangzhen just now. I wonder how long it'll take for junior martial brother Zheng? Zheng Feng was really a little surprised this time. In alchemy, different effects had different classifications, but there was no hierarchy. The final result of the pill only depended on the quality of the herbs and the ability of the alchemist. In the Yuhuan heavens, the most common alchemy was the heaven and earth pill, which was the so-called famous pill. Many sects were familiar with and accepted them. As for the alchemy that Jing Feng and the others had refined before, they weren't mainstream at all. They could only be said to be used for practice, and there was no classification at all. If Cui Ming could really refine an earth pill, then she would be worthy of the title of alchemist. He couldn't help but become serious and asked, "Senior sister Zheng can refine an earth pill?" Cui Ming had a gentle personality and didn't want to make fun of Zheng Feng. She said, "Junior brother Zheng, don't listen to junior brother Chio's nonsense. The pill recipe that God passed on is profound. My aptitude is slightly lacking, and I can only understand 30 to 40% of it. Just now, I've succeeded by luck. If I were to refine it now, I wouldn't have much confidence in succeeding." Junior brother Chio interrupted, "Senior sister, there's no need to be modest. If you succeed, then you succeed. Even God said that you're the first person in our generation to become an alchemist." Zheng Feng cupped his hands and said, "Then I really have to congratulate senior sister. Once one became an alchemist, it meant that they could travel outside, and no matter which tribe they went to, they would be welcomed. From then on, they could shoulder the heavy responsibility of the sect's prosperity." Cui Ming bowed in return and said, "Thank you, junior brother. With junior brother's ability, I believe that you'll surpass senior sister soon." Junior brother Chio raised his chin and said, "Senior sister, someone like him who only focuses on refining pills all day and doesn't make friends with others will never catch up to senior sister Cui no matter what." Zheng Feng glanced at him and said, "I've already found 6 herbs half a year ago." With that, he turned and walked into the hall. Junior brother Chio didn't react at first, but after a while, his expression changed and he said in shock, "You?" He looked at Zheng Feng's back in bewilderment. Since he had found the 6 herbs, it was obvious that he was preparing to refine them into pills. This meant that he only needed to advance a little bit more and he could become a core formation cultivator. Once his realm increased, his magical power would definitely increase. Not only would refining pills become easier, but he would also be able to master more pill recipes. This would be a huge leap. However, among them, the one with the highest cultivation level was only at the second level of the mystic light realm. It was almost impossible for them to catch up in a short period of time. Zheng Feng entered the pill hall and was called in after reporting. Seeing Zhang Yan's clone sitting on a futon, he went up and bowed. Disciple greets Shang Zhen. Zhang Yan saw that there was still a lingering pill aura around him and smiled. Then the Quan Fong pill is done? Zheng Feng said, yes, please check it. He took out the jade box, and a boy came down and placed it on the table. Zhang Yan's gaze swept across it. He evaluated it for a while and flicked his finger. A talisman flew down and he said, this is the 6th pill recipe. Remember, cultivation is the foundation of everything. Even when refining pills, you can't delay it. Zheng Feng was a smart person and immediately understood that he was going to study the pill recipe after reaching the core formation realm. He said, disciple will listen to Shang Zhen's teachings. Zhang Yan nodded and said, go. Zheng Feng originally had many questions about the pill recipe, but seeing that Zhang Yan didn't want to talk about it, he only bowed and left. Zhang Yan pondered for a moment. Zheng Feng's comprehension was good, and his temperament was tenacious. Among these disciples, there was only one who could achieve great things in the Tao of alchemy. Zhang Yan really had the intention to pass down some superior alchemy skills, which could be considered as a useful chess piece in the Yuhuan All Heavens. However, he had a flaw. He didn't know how to be a person and didn't know how to get along with others. He thought that talent was enough. If he didn't change this, it wouldn't be a problem if his path was smooth, but if he suffered a setback, he would probably fall into a situation where no one could help him. The higher he climbed, the harder he fell. Therefore, he planned to find a chance to polish this talent so that it wouldn't affect his talent. He stood up and walked outside. With his hands behind his back, he leaned against the railing and looked at the ocean outside the cliff. All these years, the sects hadn't been harassed by the Jin D sect. However, he didn't think that this generation would give up. They just temporarily retreated because he was here. The battle between the cultivation sects wouldn't end in a few decades or hundreds of years. It wouldn't be strange even if it continued for thousands or tens of thousands of years. Moreover, this generation should have hidden a deeper purpose. He was sure that there would be opportunities to meet again in the future. This generation wouldn't keep retreating like this. The servant outside the door walked in and bowed. He said, Shang Zhen, spiritual master Qiu requests an audience. Zhang Yan said, invite him in. After a while, Qiu Zhongxian walked in and bowed to him. He said, Shang Zhen, I ordered the disciples to pay attention to the changes in the cave. Recently, there was green smoke coming out. This is a sign that the cave is about to open. If I'm not mistaken, it should be within these 2 to 3 days. A small part of the reason why Zhang Yan came here was to find out the use of the tortoise shell in his hand. Now that he heard that the cave was about to open, he thought for a while and said, then I'll go in and take a look. However, I don't know what arrangements the ancestral master left behind, so I don't know when I'll come out. After I leave, to prevent the people from the Jin D sect from coming again, you can tell me that I'm cultivating in isolation. Qiu Zhongxian said gratefully, thank you, Shang Zhen, for thinking of our sect. Zhang Yan said calmly, this is a small matter. Before I leave, I can make a promise to all of you. Among all the sects, no matter whose disciple enters the grotto heaven in the future, I will set up an altar to clear their name. Qiu Zhongxian's heart skipped a beat when he heard this, and he couldn't help but look excited. Their identities were quite awkward. Although they had accepted the great underworld ancestral master as their Tao inheritance ancestor, they had actually used this name to make other sects not dare to provoke them, just like what Xian Hongtian had done. However, if one looked closely, there wasn't much of a connection. But if Zhang Yan, a direct disciple of the great underworld ancestral master, could really be considered to have reached the heavens in a single step. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.